It's about time I did this again, huh? Chrono Trigger, one of my favorite games of all time. Seriously, this game is a miracle unto itself, and if I weren't stubborn about my Final Fantasy VI favoritism, it would probably be my favorite SNES RPG without question. There is no game as balanced, focused, or dedicated to its own vision as Chrono Trigger is. Well, besides Undertale and Celeste, but those masterpieces have been better handled by other YouTubers. So today we're focusing all on Chrono Trigger, the timeless classic recognized worldwide as one of the greatest games of all time. Before we get into the game itself, there are a few things you should know, namely just how big and ambitious of a project this game truly was. One fateful summer in 1992, three people happened to encounter each other while studying computer graphics in America. The creator of the Final Fantasy series, Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of the Dragon Quest series, Yuji Horii, and the artist for the Dragon Quest series, Akira Toriyama. That last one also made a niche little manga series that you may have heard of called Dragon Ball, but it's pretty obscure. They all came together to try and do something that had never been done before. Squaresoft, the developer of the Final Fantasy series, said to them, okay, develop Seiken Densetsu 2. They were a little frustrated with this because Seiken Densetsu is clearly something that has been done before, and that game would later be known in the West as Secret of Mana. Eventually they were able to get their own game started, and Secret of Mana would be something totally different with a completely different team, and also significantly less good. Sorry, Secret of Mana fans. This team of three, joined by many other people, but notably a good chunk of the staff from Final Fantasy VI, like director Yoshinori Kitase and the live director Takashi Tokita, would go on to be known as the Dream Team, due to the fact that one of the codenames for the game was Project Dream, and also just because they're a fucking awesome team of people in terms of game design. Sakaguchi handled the main mechanical systems, Horii was the one who developed the game's main plot, and Toriyama did the character designs, obviously. There is one more element of Chrono Trigger's main team that I have yet to talk about, but it is one of the most important. One that did a lot of heavy lifting, which really shows in the final product, and I'll be talking about it a lot throughout the course of this video. You see, during the development of Final Fantasy V, one sound effect designer came up to Hironobu Sakaguchi and offered him an ultimatum. Either he be allowed to compose the soundtrack for a major title, or he'll quit his job. Surprisingly, Sakaguchi took him up on his offer to compose for the next game, and that person ended up being the lead composer on Chrono Trigger, the beloved Yasunori Mitsuda. Mitsuda worked harder than any other composer the team had seen at the time, composing over 180 tracks and developing stomach ulcers so bad that Nobuo Uematsu, the composer for the Final Fantasy series, had to come in and finish the rest of the tracks for him. I think that the game almost certainly wouldn't be the same without him, considering how unique of a musical style he has. It even continues into Chrono Cross, which is one of the very few good things about that game. Finally, we have Masato Kato, who did more for this game than people know. He was the lead writer and came with a lot of the ideas presented in it. The entirety of one of my favorite arcs in the game was written solely by him. If it weren't for Masato Kato, we probably wouldn't have the game as we understand it. He literally invented Luca. I don't know how many people can say that. The Dream Team was the perfect fit for people to develop a brand new RPG that fired on all cylinders. It's a collection of some of the most skilled people in the industry, and unlike most experiments of this kind, this team ended up actually achieving their goal. Each person contributed to their part perfectly, and their strengths and experience shine through. Chrono Trigger is a monument to gaming and one of the greatest games ever made. It's about time I got into why. The game opens on just a single shot of a pendulum. That's right, the game's about time. Anybody could have told you that, though. This pendulum starts a trend of something I really admire about Chrono Trigger. Its consistent graphical prowess. This doesn't look like a 16-bit sprite. If it weren't for the frankly minor compression, it would look like an actual pendulum. On an actual CRT, the additional blurring with scan lines would make it look like a pendulum. I adore it. This title screen is easily my favorite of the SNES Squaresoft lineup, including Final Fantasy VI. To go with it, there's an entire opening montage, but frankly it's not much more than just plain cool. It's well edited and put together, in addition to featuring lots of iconic moments from the game, but that's kind of my problem with it. The main theme, appropriately titled Chrono Trigger, is fucking fantastic though, and there's no way in hell you'll get me to say otherwise. When you start the game after choosing a save file, you're prompted to play with the active or wait time systems for your battles. Active means the battle continues even when you're on your turn, with enemies moving around and performing actions, and wait means enemies will wait for you. Playing on active is the best way to experience the ins and outs of the battle system, so I recommend playing on that. I'll get more into it when we get into our first battle, but Chrono Trigger has the best usage of Final Fantasy's active time battle system that I've ever seen, and that's coming from someone who's played every Final Fantasy game that uses it. It's really masterful. Then you get to your first naming screen in the game. While Final Fantasy was doing some pretty bold and creative things with its naming scheme around this time, the Italian opera aesthetic bleeding into character introductions, Chrono Trigger kept it simple, just a portrait and a name. I have more general critiques of naming characters in games, but I don't really have a problem with it here aside from that. Chrono is the name of our main protagonist, and you can definitely tell he's a creation of Toriyama's from the hair and the face. We open the game proper with a panning shot of the world map, which is one of the most gorgeously stylized I've seen in any RPG that uses them. It just feels like a picturesque painting in all its forms. Most SNES-era RPGs like this didn't really try to do anything interesting with their world maps, so I'm glad there was a lot of difference here. There seems to be some kind of festival going on as calm morning music plays. The camera stops over a specific house, which we learn is Chrono's. There, his mom wakes him up. He might have been late for what's known as the Millennial Fair if she didn't. Chrono's mom, despite not being named, is a great character. Unlike most JRPG protagonists who seem to have completely absentee or dead parents, Chrono has a wonderful mother who you can visit for updates numerous times throughout the course of the game's story. Right now all she'll do is give you allowance and tell you to remember to be a good person. Oh yeah, Chrono doesn't talk. It's kind of a staple of RPGs for the time, so it probably doesn't need much introduction, but I thought it was worth mentioning because Sakaguchi and Horii fought over this constantly. Obviously Horii ended up winning in the end, and I think it was for the best. Chrono works exceptionally well as a stand-in for the player, and having an avatar like this is pretty important to a game where so much of it is defined by the player's choices. They also do something incredibly interesting with this later in the game. There's a neat thing you can do here with the curtains in Chrono's room where you can pull them back, which is just the first of many environmental interactions that do nothing but add flavor. These small interactions and the gorgeous background sprite work really adds to the atmosphere, as does Mitsuda's score here, Peaceful Days. I truly couldn't imagine this game with a different composer. We also see that Chrono is a cat person. Maybe that's why I think he's such a good player stand-in. It is through dialogue with Chrono's mom that you actually learn about another character, Luca. Luca is a great character, and I don't see people talk about her nearly enough. She's a good example of a character who doesn't really grow or change in any meaningful capacity, but still ends up leaving a lasting impression on the player. She's a talented inventor with a bit of a charming ego. She's also basically Bulma, but without the gross sexualization of her character. I wonder if this was Toriyama's attempt at writing a past wrong. Speaking of Luca, you can visit her house right now, but all you can find there are disparate experiments and her mom, who wants to go to the fair but can't for some reason. She won't move at all from a seated position. As for other things we can do before progressing the plot by going to the fair, there are quite a few areas you can do things in first. It's mostly just a ton of cool, fun things that add to the atmosphere of the game. For a JRPG from 1995, this world is pretty well defined despite how small it is. There's even a ferry that you can ride for no reason other than flavor. There are several inns which essentially serve no function considering how often you get free full party heals in this game. While from a gameplay perspective this makes them incredibly useless, I do think that they add depth to the game world itself. Inside this particular inn, there's a sealed chest that makes a strange noise when you try to open it. We won't be coming back to that until much later, but it's here where we're first introduced to this idea. I like how this one in particular is contextualized as being passed down through the family that owned the inn for generations, as none of the other sealed chests we encounter will have any additional context to them. Another thing worth noting about the inn is the guy talking about a recent earthquake. I bring this up because I have no idea what he's talking about. Seriously, I played through this game several times and I wouldn't be able to tell you what he means by this. If you travel to the forest in front of the castle, you'll get your first taste of the battle system against weird mushroomy monster guys who are quite endearing. Toriyama's monster design has always been particularly strong, and this game is probably his best work in that regard. Now, here we'll talk about the actual mechanics of combat. You transition near instantly from the field to a battle. It's really cool presentation-wise. Battles feel so much more real when they're contextualized as part of the world like this. The only game I've ever seen that does a natural evolution on this idea is Final Fantasy XII, and I haven't even played that. Someday. Anyway, the battle system uses active time battle in a way that no other game I've played with ATB ever has. Special attacks, known as techs, have different areas of effect that vary depending on the type of technique, and monsters move around the battlefield over time in and out of the possible radius. For example, Chrono's Cyclone hits every enemy in a certain circle, so you have to wait for them to walk into his radius in order for him to be able to get at them. In other games, the active time battle is typically just used to apply some artificial pressure. It doesn't do a whole lot, usually just waiting-based challenges like the first boss fight from Final Fantasy IV to VII. Chrono Trigger takes this system and improves upon it substantially, with time having an actual logical purpose within the battle and enemies having organic movement around the board. It's really cool. Now that we're done with that battle-related diatribe, there is something to talk about with this forest. That being, the whole place is just so ethereal. The forest tile sets in this game are designed in an oddly soothing and melancholic way, and the track Secret of the Forest by Yasunori Mitsuda lends to this air of liminality and strangeness. It's absolutely wonderful, if a bit unnerving. One final thing of note in the forest is that there's a tab we can get here. Tabs permanently increase whatever stat they're tied to, be that strength, speed, or magic. They're not necessary to beat the game, but they sure are nice to have. Trying to go to Guardia Castle just north of this forest will get us promptly kicked out, so let's go check out other stuff first. Heading south, you can actually go on the Zenon Bridge as an area, and this is one of the prettiest areas in the game in terms of tile sheets. The sunset in the background is utterly gorgeous. There's also a hustle and bustle of people going to the fairgrounds, and this is probably where you'll first encounter an interesting quirk of this game's NPCs, namely that you can get stuck in them for a brief period of time. It's nothing major, it's just funny to me to see clipping in a non-3D game. While on the subject of NPCs, another cool thing about them is that if you walk away from them while you're talking, their text box will disappear automatically because you get out of earshot. It's a very fun detail. The only game I've seen with a mechanic that substantially expands upon this is Dark Souls, where characters will chastise you for doing the same thing. There's so much potential to build off of the ideas in Chrono Trigger, but not a lot of games seem interested in doing so for some reason. Upon arriving in Por, the city to the south, there are a few small things you can do. There's the mayor's house, where you can find that the mayor's family basically hates him for being a greedy asshole. You can dance like a chicken for him to make money though. There's also the bar, where there's not much of note besides this conspicuous jerky vendor who is way more important to the plot than you realize, and a monster who plays piano. He tells us that this is a friendly monster and not one of the ones that split off during the war a few hundred years ago. This is one of the first places we can learn about the schism between humans and the mystics, as the monsters are called. It's an oddly framed plot detail, and I'll get into it more later when more is revealed about it. Let's finally go to the fairground itself, shall we? Well, there's a lot going on there. The design team did a really great job with Yuji Horii's vague notes of a fair is happening. It feels like a real fair. A small one, but still one that feels like it could actually exist in our world, besides the magic stuff. It's filled with depth and small interactions that make up a good part of this game's core spirit. For example, there's several little fair games that you can spend time on. There's a bell ringing challenge, you can fight a talking robot built by Luca who sings an awesome and humorous song named Gato, you can do a soda drinking minigame that I'm not even sure is beatable. You can steal an old man's sandwich, you can help a girl find her cat, and you can even gamble on races. Well, it's not really gambling because it's free. Each racer has their own gimmick, but ultimately who wins is random. I only bring this up because I love that one of the racers is literally just an orange tabby cat. All of this gets you silver points, a fake fairground currency. The best way to grind this currency is by fighting Gato the robot. He gets you 15 per fight and he sings a fun song to boot. Gato introduces the combat idea of counters, which is used heavily throughout this game. Every single physical attack you make on him is countered by a comedic punching glove. I think it's a great way to tutorialize you on the mechanic naturally. The only problem is that you don't really know when he's countering. As a kid, I just thought he was always getting his turn first or something. Fun fact, Gato's name is Gonzalez in the Japanese version, and up until recently I didn't know why there was such a stark difference between the names. The reason is because they're both a reference to the famous wrestler Gato Gonzalez, and Gonzalez didn't fit within the SNES's character limits. After being told this, I could sort of see the pro wrestler influences in Gato's design. It's really fun. The silver points that you earn you can spend at the tent of the enigmatic magician Norstein Beckler. Well, you can also use them to convert to regular money, but that's an awful choice. Don't do that. He uses a sped up version of Kefka's laugh. I adore that. That aside, his weirdly deformed being that's just a head and two hands has one of the most frustrating collections of minigames ever. You barely even get any reward either, just a doll of Chrono or some more cats for your house. At least nothing good is locked behind the annoying guessing game of Final Fantasy mainstays Biggs and Wedge, who in turn are references to minor Star Wars characters. That's something I never understood. Why those two characters out of everyone in Star Wars? It's a running gag I've never gotten, but I've always appreciated. We get a bit of lore here. 400 years before the events of the story, there was a big war against an evil fiend lord named Magus. This is introduced here subtly through an old lady telling a story, and a lot of interesting pieces of lore are delivered here that way, and also throughout the entire game. There's a caveman dancing that's an ancestral tradition, and a gossiping old woman gives you the skinny on the king's daughter being a tomboy, which is treated as some kind of moral failing of her character or something for some reason. While exploring the fair, we bump into a new character, Marl. She drops a pendant, and we help her pick it up, and then she tags along to enjoy the fair. Marl is our first new party member, and she has her own special animations and abilities. Much like every other character in this game, Marl's animations really communicate her. When she misses a crossbow firing in a battle, she giggles as an example. She's energetic and cute, and that's really all she needs to be. Not my favorite party member, but a worthy addition to the cast. If you do things around the fair with her, she'll have some cute remarks about what's going on too. One particular interaction that I find interesting is that with Melchior the Swordsmith. He's a merchant with a notably distinct sprite from the other characters, and you can try to sell Marl's pendant to him. Depending on when you do this, either he or Marl will object to the sale because of the pendant's importance. You can also bring her to meet Chrono's mom, which starts a fun tradition that this game has. Every character you have join your party you can bring to meet Chrono's mom, and she'll have a different thing to say about each one. Finally, you can also try to bring Marl to Guardia Castle, but instead of the guards chasing you off, she insists the two of you leave instead, which is a bit suspicious. We'll come back to that later. After you're done tooling around at the fair for a bit, it's time to go see what you came here for, Luca's invention. On the way, we're stopped by Marl trying to get some candy, which is an annoyingly long interaction, but it has an interesting purpose later. Anyway, Luca and her father are demonstrating a new teleporter they've invented, and when Chrono tries it, it works perfectly, much to the crowd's amazement. Apparently, Luca isn't known for her inventions working, except Gato works perfectly fine, is an incredible fighting robot. Whatever. Luca's father, who happens to be present, Taban, is an interesting character. For a sprite, he uses a generic man, but he's a pretty distinct person himself. He's really proud of his daughter, and it's quite endearing. Upon Marl entering the portal, however, her pendant reacts to it strangely, and a gateway is open that consumes her. So, Chrono jumps in after her, and the plot truly begins. After a Mode 7-based time travel sequence, of course. Upon arriving on the other side of the gate, Chrono is immediately greeted by two imps. These imps, which often stick their tongues out directly at the players in action, are very Toriyama flavored. They practically look like carbon copies of Emperor Pilaf, and that's not an insult. I love it, and they're probably my favorite regular enemy type in the game. Another enemy type that you encounter in this area is the Rollo, which are just cute little ball things that roll around. I bring this up specifically because you can see two imps kicking a Rollo around. This is a pretty notable part of Chrono Trigger. There aren't random encounters, and they are instead engaged directly from the map, as I said before. However, unlike most games where there aren't random encounters, many of the monsters in Chrono Trigger have things they're doing before you interrupt them, or interesting ways of engaging in combat with you. These imps are a great microcosm of that. They're just playing with a Rollo. These monsters have a life outside of the player. It's incredibly charming. Once you arrive on the overworld and out of this canyon-y area, you'll notice that you appear to be on the same world map as before, just with a lot of significant differences. A more muted color palette and a great song mark this an entirely different time and place. And when I say great song, I mean great song. Quite possibly one of the best songs in any game I've ever played. It's not my favorite in this game, but it's definitely up there. It really communicates how distant and far away from any sense of home you are. You soon learn from talking to townspeople that this is specifically 600 AD, the same year that the war on Magus occurred. In fact, you hear that it's currently occurring from quite a few people too. There are a few fun interactions here, like one guy who keeps on finding and subsequently losing the motivation to work on Queen Lane's bell, the same bell you see in the center of the square in the present. There's an explorer named Tomo who you can buy drinks for, and he'll tell you stuff you don't need to know, like how the queen came back or something. Toma is interesting in that he has a unique sprite despite his rather minor role in things, but I like him. Also, due to censorship from Nintendo of America, the drinks you buy him are non-alcoholic soda pops, which is always funny for me. Before I go into detail on the rest of the areas available to us, I'd like to talk a bit about my thoughts on time travel in this game. I won't be criticizing the time travel logic in this game very much, because it very obviously doesn't make much sense, and I don't think it's trying to hide that. Time travel is inherently confusing, and Chrono Trigger gets really confusing if you try to take the time travel any deeper than what you're presented with at face value. You can't go down Zenon Bridge to the south because it's been destroyed in the fight against Magus' troops, but you can go to a cathedral that isn't there in the present. Here there are just a few nuns. What's important though is that their dialogue is all weird. They make morbid jokes about murdering you and stuff. Perfectly normal nunnery. Going back through Guardia Forest and up to the castle, not much has changed. You can interact with a bush for a cute little monster to pop out and get a free shelter, basically a full heal you can use on any save point. I call attention to this because you can do this interaction an infinite amount of times. All you have to do is reload the area. It's a good way to grind out shelters, which is pretty obviously overpowered. Yet another indicator of the obsolescence of inns in this game. In the castle, you're stopped at the door and bullied by some guards before the queen claims you're a friend of hers and mysteriously retreats to her quarters. Before we do what she says though, there's a lot to explore. There's another sealed chest here, and there's a few interactions we can see, like wounded soldiers from the war and a weird pun about ice cream. Many of the NPCs here note that the queen seems a lot younger than she should. The chef in the kitchen is worth mentioning, particularly because he has a subplot with the captain of the royal guards. The two of them are arguing because they're brothers, and the chef is worried about him. It's a really sweet micro-narrative, and I think it works well as one of the small stories that you affect in your journeys across time. When you finally go meet the queen after thoroughly looting the place like the RPG hero that you are, you find out that she's actually Marl. As it turns out, they mistook her for the queen because she's the princess from the present day and actually a descendant from the queen, and hid this from Chrono because she was afraid that he wouldn't want to hang out with her if he knew that. However, while she's explaining this, she disappears entirely. Soon enough, Luca arrives and explains that Marl disappeared because of the grandfather paradox, a classic time travel trope. I'm not really a fan of it, but it doesn't really overstay its welcome in this game in particular, so I don't mind too much. Essentially, Marl disappeared because her being in the past made them call off the search for the real Queen Lene, which meant Queen Lene was killed before she was supposed to be, which means that Marl would never be born. Oops. Now you have Luca in the party, whose thing is using a gun and also setting things on fire. Her flame toss ability is cool because it hits enemies in a line, which is useful for very specific formations and not much else. But since she's a magic attacker and her technology deals magic damage for reasons I'll theorize on later, it's great in the early game. It's also just cool to see a tech with such a unique area of effect. Finding Queen Lene is the primary goal here, and it's pretty obvious that she's somewhere in that suspicious cathedral with all the weird nuns. Sure enough, you find a brooch here that only Queen Lene was known for wearing and fight off the nuns who are actually Naga-ettes, which is what the game calls lamias for some reason. Maybe it's a translation thing, I don't know what they're called in the DS version. After the short encounter, Luca gets a surprise attack for another one which she can't fend off despite having just defeated like 5 of them with Chrono's help. But she's saved by a bipedal frog person. This is Frog, my personal favorite party member. He's a talking frog who wields a sword and speaks in Old English. He's the only character in the whole game who does this, even other characters from the same time period don't. Though I obviously know it's probably just a silly translation thing considering the DS version totally removes this, I like to imagine that Frog does it in order to seem like a strong knight, especially with what we learned about him later. Something I like about Frog's name is that in Japanese his name is Kaeru, which makes sense because it's the word for frog. But it's also the word for change, which makes sense in the context of his character later in the story, and I'm sure you can already guess where I'm going with that even without knowing. Luca is grossed out by Frog in a cute character moment, but she gets over it and lets Frog join the party. Then Frog says, "Let us search the environs!" and I immediately regret letting him join. Joking aside, Frog is actually a really fun party member. Most of his techniques come from his, well, being a frog, or his swordplay skills. There's a simple pipe organ related puzzle, and you're on your way deeper into the cathedral. This cathedral is actually a secret hideout for Magus' troops, and as such there's a lot of interactions involving them. You can steal a pinup poster that they have, you can encounter some that are on break that think you're a human in disguise, there are a few disguised as Queen Lene and other members of Guardia's nobility, and there's a room where they all worship a statue of Magus. This is the first time we get a look at Magus, and he looks really badass. one of the coolest character designs in the game. Eventually, you make it to the end of the dungeon and find that the Chancellor was secretly a monster working for Magus named Yakra the whole time, and he kidnapped Queen Leene. Enter a boss fight with him. He counters depending on how far away the character attacking him is, though it's so superfluous that I've never really noticed it. What's more important for me to talk about here is the fact that you've probably started to learn duel techniques by now, and that's one aspect of Chrono Trigger that is really fucking cool. Character texts can combine with each other to show off their personalities and their abilities in interesting ways, and nearly all characters have a huge amount of combinations. It's probably my favorite part of what is already a stellar combat system. The only problem is that there's often no incentive to use them aside from their novelty. They do about the same damage as just if you used a regular tech, so it's better to have everyone act individually. I really feel like they should have combined damage calculations for each individual tech used and done that for dual techs, even if that sounds a bit overpowered. It's not like Chrono Trigger is a game that's concerned with how hard it is, considering it's not hard. You beat Yakra, save the real Chancellor and Queen Leene, and leave. The real Chancellor being stuffed in a treasure chest, of course. The real Chancellor mentioned something about creating a more strict judicial system to prevent stuff like this from happening in the future. Ah yes, because the Fiend Lord would have been stopped simply had he been tried in a court of law. Lucas says Frog isn't such a bad guy after all, and Frog leaves because he still feels dishonored. We also get to hear his theme play for the first time, and it's absolutely excellent. You go check on Marl, and she says a line that has always stuck with me. It's a very odd line in a game as tonally light as Chrono Trigger, but she says,
I went somewhere dark and cold. Is that what it's like to die?
I think about it quite a bit. Funnily enough, she shakes it off, and nothing about her brief period of not existing anymore is ever mentioned again throughout the entire game. All of the NPC dialogue in the castle updates, but there's nothing noteworthy here besides some weird shaming from one of the waitresses about how Marl eats a lot, so let's just return to the gate. Luca says she's invented a gate key that can open up these gates, and when Marl compliments her, Luca takes it in stride before dialing it back just because Marl is a princess. Luca's egotistical nature is something that I highly appreciate. She has a nice level of confidence about her that a lot of female characters in RPGs from the era didn't. Marl's modesty, despite her royal upbringing, is also an interesting character trait. The three of them go back into the gate and back to the future. Luca leaves Chrono and Marl alone to go back to the castle, and nothing has really changed in this time period. However, if you go to Luca's house, you can find her murmuring to herself about humanoid robots. I think it's a bit of an odd detail that she's so fixated on this, because she's already built a humanoid robot, Gato. You can also find Luca's dad, Tavan, bringing Luca's mom the money they made at the fair, which is really cute. Now it's just time to bring Marl home and, apparently saving the Chancellor and allowing him to create a stronger judicial system in the past led to this happening in the present. Chrono is kidnapped by the guards, and Marl gets very upset as he's hauled away. There's a bit of light comedy with them not listening to the Chancellor and listening to her instead, but now it's time for one of the most fantastic illustrations of Chrono Trigger as a game. The trial is a very notable part of Chrono Trigger. It's one of the scenes a lot of people point to when describing what they love about the game as a whole, and it's something that I love quite a bit too. Basically, Chrono is on trial for supposedly kidnapping Marl, even though that's not really what happened. You get to see the court proceedings play out, and then a jury votes on whether or not Chrono is guilty. Remember what Chrono's mom said before you went to the Millennial Fair? Be good today. Let's hope you followed that advice, because the coming trial directly relies on what you did while you were at the fair. So many minute things come into play, whether or not you picked up the pendant before you checked on Marl, or if you tried to sell the pendant to Melchior, or if you stole that guy's lunch, and it's really such a fun culmination of all the decisions you made in the first hour of the game. It's very much a good indicator of how the game focuses on player choice. It's iconic. It's also kind of a funny pastiche of how JRPGs have conditioned you to play. You ate the old man's lunch because the game told you you could and it was a free full heal. You got the pendant before talking to Marl because there was a shiny item on the ground. You're being punished for being a JRPG protagonist. And the music for it is just fantastic, really conveying the nature of this kangaroo court. The lighting in this room combined with the stained glass window is also just really impressive, another piece of Chrono Trigger's beautiful art. I have one very minor problem with the scene, and it's that one of the members of the jury is bugged, so what they vote on is ultimately random. I guess that guy's just an asshole or something. Whatever the case, Chrono is still arrested no matter if the jury finds him guilty. If he's found guilty, he's officially stayed to be executed. If not, then he's detained for a few days for quote-unquote running off with the princess, but is slated to be executed under wraps anyway. Who would have guessed that the Chancellor was evil? Anyway, you go to jail, and here's another part where there's an interesting choice. You can wait to be executed, or you can break out of prison. I didn't even know you could wait to be executed for a very long time, and to be honest, it's far more beneficial to try to break out anyway. Something else kind of neat is that you have some items that some sympathizers gave you depending on how well you performed at the trial, though it's never anything amazing. This prison area is a pretty standard dungeon with some interesting climbing puzzles and a guy who, dies when you talk to him, but ultimately not much going on. Here starts a funny trend of naming undead characters weird things like Dissident, in order to get around Nintendo's weird restrictions about death. There are a few enemies that you have to wait for in order to attack because they have large shields, but most of the enemies here don't do a whole lot. The one big differentiator this dungeon has from the others in a gameplay sense is that you can sneak up behind the guards and stealth kill them for a tonic. It's a bit challenging to do and the reward is incredibly minimal, but I think it's cute, and it's an option. Something to note is that a lot of the enemies here are monsters, which is weird for the capital of a human country. This isn't a dig at the game or anything, just something to note for later. Along the way, you meet a guy in a guillotine named Fritz. I neglected to mention this earlier, but his dad runs the item shop in Truce, and he's gone missing. His head is quite literally currently stuck in a guillotine, and it's implied your prison break is what saved him. You get the option to save him or not, and I really want to meet the guy who chooses no. It's another interesting choice in this game, though ultimately I think it's one of the weakest ones because if you don't save him, nothing really changes. There's really no reason not to save him, so of course everyone will. Luca meets you on the way out, and a guard drops some papers on the ground which you can read to get an idea of a strategy for the next boss. Chrono Trigger has a lot of bosses with specific mechanics and weaknesses to them, and oftentimes hints to what their weaknesses are cleverly hidden in the lead up to them. Here is no different. The next boss, the Dragon Tank, has its weaknesses outlined in its user's manual. The fight against the Dragon Tank takes place on one of the side-scrolling segments of the game, which are often used as an interesting visual effect. Basically, here's how the Dragon Tank fight works. The wheels and head attack you with powerful attacks, and the head also heals the rest of the parts. The Dragon Tank isn't a very hard fight, but it's also immune to fire, so Luca isn't super useful here. It's an interesting interplay. Chrono finishes off with a cinematic stab to the head that shoots lightning everywhere, and when it explodes, the Chancellor's subdueds create a bridge for them to escape on, which is one of several funny visuals involving the Chancellor. As we run down the towers of Guardia Castle, I'd like to point something out about Chrono Trigger. It reuses its backgrounds in a fantastic way, which you might have noticed because the castle in the present looks nearly identical to the castle in the past. In Final Fantasy VI, for comparison, background reuse is incredibly noticeable. Not many places have unique visual flair. In Chrono Trigger, despite each location having a distinct visual identity, there are tons of reused tiles everywhere. The different palettes and small decorum adjustments really add to this. It's excellent. The present Guardia Castle feels much more foreboding than the almost homely past Guardia Castle due to the colder colors. After a comedic scene involving Marle using her princess powers again to escape with Chrono and Luca, the three of them are cornered in Guardia Forest. But there's a single gate for them to escape through here for some reason. The serendipity of the gates is something that won't be explained for quite some time. For now though, it's a good way to get the hell out of Dodge. The Chancellor gives us an extraordinarily good shocked face, and the three of them escape into the gate. When you arrive on the other side of the time gate, you might notice something. Yeah, this place looks like shit. There's a lot of high-tech stuff, and when you go on the world map, it's a desolate land with only wind noises playing in the background. If you couldn't tell already, this is a destroyed future. Something happened that made things this bleak. We can check in on a nearby dome to see that some vestiges of humanity are still hanging on, though they're all miserable. They're starving, but they're kept alive by Enertron machines that let them live but don't make them feel full. It's nightmarish. This is one of the bleakest things I've seen in a video game, and it's incredibly effective. Many people say the world of Ruin is great for showing the world at its darkest, but I think this segment of this game is even more effective. These people are dying a slow and horrible death, whereas in the world of Ruin most locations are just business as usual. When you heal to full health in an Enertron, the game says,
HP/MP restored, but you're still hungry.
To really drive this point home. The track People Without Hope is really good and accentuates everything perfectly as it plays in the background. Something interesting to note here is that there's a sealed door. When you try to open it, it gives you the same message as those sealed chests that you've been seeing everywhere. It's something to keep an eye on. The people here say that nobody can cross the ruins because of the mutants who live there, so let's go check that out next. Trying to cross the ruins is met with resistance from the local mutant population, but as it turns out, magic attacks like Luca's Flame Toss and Chrono Slash, which suspiciously operate similarly, are able to deal a lot of damage to them. This area basically serves to teach the player the difference between magic damage and physical damage. Also, there are annoying rats that look like enemies, but when you bump into them, they actually just steal shit from you. Fuck you, rats. By now you probably should be learning some of Marle's techs and realizing that she's predominantly a healer. While this makes her pretty useful earlier in the game, by the end game she gets severely outclassed by other characters in this department. That being said, she's never bad. All of the party members in Chrono Trigger are useful, and that is something that I have a major amount of respect for. It is really hard to make all of the party members in a JRPG compelling to use. Once you're out of the ruins, you have a few options for where you should go next. If you try going to the right, you'll be infinitely attacked by robots, so don't do that. We can go to the nearby sewer passage and have a fun little interlude. There are monsters hiding down here that work for someone named Sir Crawley, and you get to see their cute interactions as they move things around, which inadvertently allows you to progress further into the dungeon. There's a gag here where there are things that make noises which cause monsters to appear. A note says to not make noise, but then you get thrust into a hallway with tons of stuff that makes noise, like cheese you can kick into a box or a cat you can talk to that meows. The best part of this joke, though, is the save point at the end, which makes the little save point jingle as its joke. I really like this. It's a great example of the charm that Chrono Trigger often exudes. It's a silly gotcha. At the end of the dungeon, you fight Sir Crawley, and he's just so easy, even by Chrono Trigger standards. One of the worst bosses in this game, because he doesn't really have anything going on. You just beat him in like 3 turns. Oh well, at least he's funny. On the other side of the passage is a single island, where there's another dome and a giant mountain called Death Peak. Trying to climb the mountain is impossible, but if you go to the dome, you'll meet a crazy old man with a weird blue tomato creature. This blue tomato creature is called a New, and they'll be recurring throughout the game because they're amazing. They're the best creatures ever. Anyway, the crazy old man mentions a few things like a blackbird in the Ocean Palace, which doesn't make any sense right now, but will later. Returning back to the sewer, there's another dome that we can visit here. This one is even less hopeful than the one from before the ruins. It's here we meet a separate elderly man named Doan and his group of survivors, who see the party as some kind of hope. They ask us to go down to the food storage where one woman's husband was last seen to try and save him. There's also a little shopkeeper girl here who says that saving money is important and says that the guy who walked through the other dome used to say that, which is a neat nod to the shopkeeper guy who says the same thing in the dome west of here. Chrono Trigger's world, despite its relatively small size, feels incredibly lived in through ways like this. The food storage can't be accessed without first going through a room full of girders that use cool SNES parallax scrolling to depict the room below. And here's a weird statue of a rat and another boss fight, this time against the dome's own security system. It's another forgettably easy boss. You just have to kill the bits before attacking the body, or else they'll counterattack with a triple tech. The only issue I have with it is that if a bit dies after somebody's already loaded an attack on that bit but before the attack has been performed, sometimes the auto retargeting will hit the body, which is a bit frustrating. It's another easy boss. That's one of my few major structural problems with Chrono Trigger. It's just way too easy on the whole. After getting past this boss fight, you find the food storage room. There's a corpse in here, of the woman's husband from before. Not only that, the refrigerator systems for the food apparently went out a long time ago. It turns one of the darkest parts of the game even darker. But then you find something, a single seed in the man's palm. This man died to bring them one last piece of hope. There's also a note that says the rat is not actually a statue and that it has a secret password. Once you leave, you chase around the rat and it gives you the password to use in another room. Unfortunately, unlike a latter instance in the game, if you already know the password, you can't skip this. Inside this room, after a few battles with some regular robots and rats, you come across a computer room. Luca uses the computer to find the nearest gate, somehow, but Marle presses a button that accidentally shows how the world became this way in the future. A gigantic alien parasite named Lavos emerged from the earth and destroyed everything. Lavos' theme is excellently chilling. And the screaming sound effect it makes just perfectly encapsulates the eldritch terror of this being. Lavos is such an effective villain. He never says a word, but he's such a destructive force of nature. There's so much pure terror that his presence exudes. It's absolutely wonderful. This incident all happened 999 years after when Chrono, Marl, and Luca were alive, but instead of letting it get them down, Marl gives them a rousing speech, and the main theme of the game kicks into high gear as they run back through the corridors. They're going to beat Lavos and save the future. During this sequence, all the fights play with the main theme over them instead of the battle theme intruding on them, which is a neat touch that Chrono Trigger is especially fond of. It's really cool and effectively used here. You're finally getting pumped up and getting ready for what the adventure is really about. Time travel nonsense to stop an alien parasite from destroying everything. Hell yeah. On the way out, there's a nice scene where the party gives the people the future hope by helping them plant the seed they found. Apparently the word healthy has fallen out of use in this doomed future for quite some time, as Doan doesn't even know what it means. My only problem with this really dark part of the game's plot is that it never really goes anywhere. The game never gets this dark again and it feels kind of out of place, but I do think it's incredibly effective. After this, the place that infinitely generated robots before now just stops doing that. The robots attack you, but they are suddenly stopped by one of the greatest characters in gaming, the man! This is Johnny. He's a robot racer, and despite his small role in the plot, he has a special place in my heart. He's just really fun. In order to get across the ruins, you have to be able to beat him in a bike race. This is a really easy section that's just for showing off mode 7, unless you're crazy like me. You can walk across the ruins and find the race log, which lets you keep track of your scoring for the bike racing. If you get a high enough score, you get one power tab. Guess who spent a few hours grinding for that power tab? Yeah, the racing system isn't very fun. It's a graphical marvel for the time, but not much else. On the other side of this race are two more locations to access. One is a factory you can't get into yet, and the other is another human living dome. This one, however, is completely empty. There's only one thing in here, a disheveled robot. Luca repairs this robot and has a very poignant line when asked by Marl why she's helping what could be their enemy. Robots don't hurt people. Humans just make them that way. It's a really good showcase of Luca's love for machines, and I'm glad that it's present in both translations of the game. The robot springs to life and some bombastic theme music flares up. It sounds like Never Gonna Give You Up, though Yasunori Mitsuda has stated that it was never intended to, and that he never remembered even hearing the song. My theory is that he did hear it somewhere, but didn't actively pay attention to it, and it was registered by him subconsciously or something. The resemblance is just uncanny. Regardless, it's a great song. The robot comes to life and reveals his serial number to be R66Y. Marl tells us to strip away one of the core tenets of any sentient being's identity and give him a new name, and the default just so happens to be Robo, which is cute. Robo is another one of my favorite characters in this game. He's just utterly adorable. He and Frog are constantly fighting to be my favorite. Robo informs us that we can't get to the gate in the door behind him without starting up the power in the factory up north first, which only he can open up. However, there can only be 3 party members at once. This is probably due to the tech system or due to how battles are presented. Whatever the case, we leave Luca behind to make sure nothing goes wrong because I don't trust Marl with machines. The factory is a unique dungeon that you can skip the entirety of if you already know the password. However, to do that would really hurt your leveling up and you'd be missing out on this, interesting dungeon. There are a few major mechanics here. Conveyor belts that force you into a ton of boring battles when you touch the robots on them, and a crane that's a bit difficult to operate. The conveyor belts are really annoying, but once you know how they work, you can avoid them pretty easily. The crane took me forever to figure out because the inputs after activating the crane aren't actually confirmed in any way. But you get the code, which is spelled as Z-A-B-I-E, but is X-A-B-Y on your controller, which I always thought was cute. Also during this dungeon, Robo will probably unlock his laser spin tech, which allows him to damage all enemies on the screen. This is pretty useful this early in the game, so I recommend using it a lot. After you restart the factory, all of a sudden its defenses start to activate on the party, so you have to rush out. But the elevator no longer works, so they get stopped dead in their tracks by a bunch of purple R6 units. They claim that Robo is defective for not killing the party, and in a really sad scene, they beat him until he's broken down. This scene literally made me cry when I played the game when I was like 10. It's fucked up, man. Then you have a boss fight with him, and you salvage Robo and bring him back to Luca. While Luca repairs Robo, they have an interesting discussion about purpose. Robo is often used throughout this game to explore ideas like this, and it's part of why I like him so much. He's especially profound, and his existence brings up a lot of questions about the nature of our own. What does it mean to be human? Robo has all the characteristics of a human, so what makes him different? Just an interesting question the game posits. I really love his response to Luca asking him what he wants to do with his life.
Nobody's ever asked me that before.
It's so cute and eager and highlights these ideas perfectly. The party enters the gate as Luca's triumphant theme music that seems to be overused for everything plays in the background. Seriously, it's not really attached to her in the game that much. Poor Luca. When the party emerges, however, they aren't greeted with any time period in particular. Instead, it's a strange, dull and gray place. There's a single old man sleeping below a lamppost, some buckets, a door, and a staircase to nowhere. The old man talks to the party and reveals to them that this is the end of time, where anybody who travels in a group larger than 3 from different time periods ends up. It's a very cool way of explaining a gameplay mechanic, and it's probably one of my favorite hubs in any game. Before we leave, he tells us to check out the door behind him. Inside is probably a Killwalla enemy, depending on how much you leveled up before this point. If you've been following the story naturally, that's what it will be. However, if you get here as low leveled as possible, it will be a frog instead. This is no ordinary monster, however. This is Specchio, the Master of War. He reveals that long ago humans used magic and that each of the party members has some innate magical ability. In order to realize them, they have to walk in a circle around the room and think about magic, which is funny. Chrono learns lightning, Marl learns ice, and Luca learns fire. Robo can't learn magic because, rather tragically and comedically, he doesn't have a soul, but his lasers deal shadow damage. That might seem weird, but I have a theory for it later. I love Specchio. You can fight him here with your magic powers in order to get stuff from him, and as you get stronger, he gets stronger. That's why he can be a frog or a Killwalla this early in the game. I won't spoil what he becomes at his final level because it's truly something special. Specchio can only be hurt by magic, and though he's not a mechanically deep boss, he is a very cool one, and it's very fun to challenge his various forms. Plus, whenever you beat him, he says,
I am the Master of War.
Woo! Sometimes I even scare myself.
and who doesn't love that? Once you're done with that, the old man will let you be on your way, but warn you about one of the buckets. One of the buckets in the end of time gives you a free full heal. Do you see what I mean when I say inns are useless? Yeah. The other bucket, however, is the one he warns us about. If you go inside... That's right, you go straight to the final boss fight against Lavos. This is one of the coolest things about this game. You can fight the final boss at virtually any point you want after you get to the end of time. However, you are definitely going to get destroyed by him due to how the game is balanced unless you spent a lot of time grinding, which leads to an interesting cutscene. Instead of a traditional game over, you get to see the final moments of a captain working during the day Lavos appeared in 1999. It's oddly touching. It's annoying if you've died to Lavos multiple times while trying to beat his final boss fight, but overall I think it's better than not having it. Having a bad ending as opposed to a traditional game over is really cool. We obviously aren't going to beat Lavos yet, so I won't go into the specifics of his fight, but you get to see some of them early here. For now, let's just leave the end of time and see if there's an easier path forward. I'm sure there is. There are a few options, but let's try going to 65 million BC first. You're not supposed to go to the prehistoric era yet, normally, but the game allows you, and you can do a few things here before the plot requires you to be here. First of all, I love that the time gate is off the edge of the cliff. Of course, not all of the gates would be in optimal areas for the party, and it's always so fun to see their reaction when they fall out of it. Anyway, you can go chat with the people of the early civilization and realize that they're kind of boring, and you can trade for better weapons in the trading place. Or at least you could if you had permission from the chief, who is mysteriously absent. This is our first introduction to the prehistoric economy. You kill animals and get their body parts, which you trade for goods. It's a neat, flavorful touch. Speaking of the enemies you fight here, they are predominantly dinosaurs. There is one weird quirk of the dinosaurs in this game. They're all weak to lightning. Though it doesn't make any sense why they would be weak to lightning in the English translation, it's actually because of the original Japanese text. In that version of the game, lightning is more like heaven magic. And what came from the heavens to kill the dinosaurs? I rest my case. There's also another new here at the hunting ground, and this one we get to fight. Be prepared, because news can reduce your HP to 1. Oh wait, they can't do any damage other than that. Yeah, that's the big joke of the news. They can only bring you to 1 HP. This is just the first combat encounter we'll have with one. Also gives you a certain amount of tech points upon dying. That being said, I don't like how the hunting ground is so hard to access. It literally has no unique icon on the map and just looks like generic forest tiles. I didn't know it existed until my third playthrough of the game. And that's a big problem I have with prehistory in general. Despite being able to explore most of this era this early in the game, you may have noticed that I don't really care for, well, any of it. It's not aesthetically interesting at all to me, and it feels like it was one of the last eras designed for the game or something. The water on the world map doesn't even move. From what I understand, it was supposed to be larger during development, but an extra dungeon got cut for time, which led to the half-baked era that's in the final game. Despite my big problems with prehistory, I think it's super cool that you can visit it. Due to this game being time travel based, there are so many unique locations that you can visit, like a desolate future and a prehistoric past. These are locations you'd never see in most RPGs, and it's a nice change of pace. With that being said, let's go to the portal to 1080 and see if we can learn anything about Lavos there. When we emerge, we're back in the present. The only problem is that we jump out of the closet of some imps. Instead of attacking us, these imps are friendly as they, quote, don't hold a grudge against humans for what happened. And here's where I talk about Chrono Trigger's weird racial conflict. The humans and the mystics had a war a long time ago, obviously, and that's why there's tensions between them in the present day. But it all just feels really weird. Mystics are depicted as strongly bigoted against humans, and I feel like there's some takeaway you're supposed to make from this. I'm not even sure what to say about it other than it's there. It doesn't really add much. Anyway, I really like that this particular gate is in the closet of the house of these two poor imps. We'll be going in and out of this gate a few times over the course of the game, and it's always fun to see their shocked reactions. For some reason, they just never get over the fact that we're climbing in and out of this portal. I wonder if this is a Narnia reference or something. Upon searching around the village, you're encountered with more weird bigotry that seems like it's trying to be commentary, but kind of fails. There's a store where you're attacked the moment you enter, only for the prices to be jacked up considerably after you survive the battle. Also, the battle's with Omnicrone, who's a guy who was in jail earlier. Neat. It's never explained if this is the same guy or what. Again, I think the weird racial allegory just frankly doesn't work in the game. It feels weird and doesn't really say much of anything, except racism is bad, which, yes, it is bad, but I'd like to see it expanded upon more than just that. The only other thing to note about this village is that a blue guy calling himself the descendant of the great Ozzy is a jerk who orders around the other villagers, and that there's a statue of Magus in the town square, the same one from the cathedral. The monsters who chant around it claim that Magus created Lavos, which leads the party to decide to go back in time and defeat Magus in order to stop Lavos' creation, our first lead. On the other side of the village is a strange, translucent blue pyramid sealed like the doors and chests are from earlier. There's nothing we can do here yet again, so just make a note of it. Finally, before departing to the cave in the west, you can go to a house on the shoreline. This is where Melchior lives, and he'll sell some better stuff now. Nothing else new with him, but keep where he lives in your mind. The Magic Cave is one of the least memorable dungeons in this game. In fact, I don't really think I can tell you anything about it. There are enemies that are mostly meek to magic, a weird water current based section, and an enemy called a gin bottle. You know, like it's a pun on the word gin, like alcohol, and gin like the kind of spirit that typically lives in a bottle. I like it. The boss here is Hekran, who can only be hit with magic. This boss doesn't really do much of anything. He just counters at random intervals, and you just have to wait until he's done countering before you attack him again. Rinse and repeat until you win. For some reason, he mentions Lavos also, I guess just in case the player missed it earlier, and he disappears. The party rides a whirlpool and gets spat out at Lucas' house. While in the present, before going back to 600 AD, there are a few small things we can do. If we go to the store after having saved Fritz from the guillotine, we can see him working there with his dad and his girlfriend. He even gives us a few healing items for free. See, being a good person helps. If you take Robo to Chrono's mom, she'll say he's a polite young boy, which is very true. Robo is a very polite young man, and I will protect him with my life. Also, Chrono's mom will be happy to see that Chrono has, in fact, not been executed. At least someone cares. With that out of the way, let's get back to the Middle Ages. When you return to 600 AD, something is going down at Guardia Castle. The king has been badly wounded in the Battle of Xenon Bridge, and a hero has suddenly appeared. This hero was prophesied to defeat Magus at some point in the past, so the king let himself get wounded in order to help him get across the bridge. However, from what we hear, this hero is most likely a child, which is odd. Going to Xenon Bridge will have the commander tell you they're out of rations there, so you return to the castle and have the chef yell at you. When you try to leave, the chef will return and then give you some of the rations. After you give the jerky to the knight captain, he looks at the ground sullenly. I really like this subplot, but this part in particular I'm not super fond of, mainly because you have to talk to the knight captain first instead of just going to go get the jerky. It's a little silly how you can't do that minor sequence break, but it's not a big deal. The ancestor of that Ozzy character from the Village of the Mystics is here, the original Ozzy, and he's not happy. He summons lots of skeletons to fight you, but if you hit him 3 times instead, they'll all be taken care of, which is a cool way to make the player think outside the box. Then he summons a boss, Zombor. This boss is interesting in that its body parts are each resistant to some kind of magic. I honestly forget which, and I forget every playthrough. I just do trial and error every time, which I guess is what you're supposed to do, considering there are no hints before you fight it as to what it might be weak to. Once you're out of there, you can go to a nearby town on the other side of the bridge that is surprisingly not present at all in the future in order to find a few key interactions. For one, remember that weird porn you found back in Manolia Cathedral? If you give it to an old man here, he'll give you a magic tab. Thanks? You also learn that Ozzy is one of 3 generals, the other 2 being named Flea and Slash. According to the NPC you learn this from, they're all tone-deaf hacks. I love this joke. It's obviously poking fun at them being named after Ozzy Osbourne, Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers, and Slash from Guns N' Roses. In the original Japanese, they actually have different names. Ozzy is vinegar, Flea is mayonnaise, and Slash is soy. Why they changed the names, I'm not sure, but I like it. Finally, if we check the mayor's office, we can see the great explorer Toma getting some money to go find a mystical item called the Rainbow Shell, and then immediately going to the bar and wasting all the money he was given by the mayor. South of this town, and in the middle of a desert area, is a lone house. Here lives Fiona, whose husband was drafted in the war. She seems a little more concerned with the fact that there isn't a forest around her house, however. We'll be returning to this thread eventually, but if you know anything about me, it's time to put a pin in this. Another thing to put a pin in is the strange cliff face you can visit on the eastern side of the continent. There is quite literally nothing to do here yet. If you go further south, you learn more about this supposed hero in another town. He's a boy named Tata, and his father is very prideful about the fact that his son is the hero. Apparently he's wearing a badge that everyone thinks makes him the hero. Also interesting is that there's mentions of a frog person stirring around. Where have we heard of a frog person before? Let's go into the suspicious forest clearing near Fiona's house. This is the Cursed Woods, a small passage filled with enemies and the occasional new. This is another place where you can regularly fight news for lots of tech points. However, once we get our minds off the new, a feat that I know is incredibly difficult, we can find a secret passageway into an underground hovel. Here is Frog's home, where he claims he has been disgraced after losing the hero's badge, so it was for him all along. He tells us to get out, and we can't open the one conspicuous treasure chest in here yet. There's only one place left to go, and it's up into the Denadora mountain range on the other side of this part of the continent. So, let's ascend them. Upon arriving in the mountains, you'll see a young boy who tells you to stay away because of the scary monsters up here. That's Tata, the supposed hero. We chase after him and encounter some unique enemy types that, if you paid attention to some of the townspeople, were hinted at earlier. These goblins wielding hammers have incredibly high defense, but if you use a fire-based attack on them, their hammers burn up and they drop them, which makes them vulnerable. It's an interesting battle mechanic. More interesting, and more fun for me at least, are the freelancer enemies. They don't have any unique mechanics, but a lot of them are quite funny. There's one that tells you get lost before attacking you, and another that throws a rock at a goblin to wake him up. One final interaction of note here is a Kilwalla who will tell you that mountains are nice, and you can annoy the shit out of him for a free magic tab. At the end of the mountain trail is a single cave with a sword stuck in the end of it. However, in order to get this sword, you have to fight its 2 masters, Masa and Mune, the spirits who live inside the sword. I've always liked their designs, they feel very 80s Jim Henson workshop-y. The first battle against them is a pretty easy double battle, you just had to beat one to have both of them defeated. The second phase they combine to a muscular guy who doesn't really have that interesting of a fight. He just stores wind energy, which you have to break using Chrono Slash move, or else will unleash a lot of damage. This is something else the NPCs in town might have told you before. After defeating him, you gain the Masamune, or just one half of it. Inscribed on the blade is Melchior's name, which gives you a hint as to who might be able to fix it, but what's his work doing here? Something interesting about the sword is that the Masamune is, in real life, a style of katana forged by a specific man named Masamune. However, in this game, it's sort of a European broadsword. Its Japanese name is Grand Leon, which fits more because Leon means lion, and lions are very integral to a lot of European folklore from the Middle Ages. I've always just thought this was one of the weirder translations in Chrono Trigger, so I thought I'd bring it up. Returning to Tata's house, he'll admit that he actually stole the hero's badge from Frog, and that he wasn't a hero after all. I actually really like the entire Tata subplot. It's yet another great commentary on JRPGs in general. Of course, a random child isn't the hero of legend, but RPG worlds are so quick to assume they would be. Bringing the other half of the Masamune and the hero's badge to Frog has him reveal that no smith alive can fix it, and he gives you the other half when you summon in its position. Frog is still too depressed to tag along, sadly. There is one person that you know who can fix it, so we go back to visit Melchior, and when he sees the Masamune, the absolutely brilliant track Corridors of Time plays. lyrics. The significance of this song won't be realized until later, but for now it's just an awesome musical motif. He tells us the only way to repair it is through a red rock that disappeared thousands of years ago, but luckily we're time travelers, so it's time to go back to prehistory. The mystery of Melchior's connection to the Masamune won't be answered for quite some time, so don't think about it too hard yet. Upon arriving in prehistory this time, Chrono and the gang are accosted by a group of reptiles, which we may have heard about from the villagers when we visited the first time. After dealing with them pretty easily, the gang decides that they're actually overwhelming you, and a cave woman comes to your rescue. She, pins Chrono to the wall and says she finds him attractive, and we learn her name is Isla. Then she tells us to follow her into the village. Also, Isla is bisexual, and it's not really turned into a joke, which is cool. Nothing has changed at all in prehistory since we left, besides the fact that Isla is now in her tent as opposed to it being suspiciously empty. She'll tell us that she's going to throw a party to celebrate our arrival, and that night, a party is indeed held. There's a few fun things to talk about here. For one, the dancing from the Millennial Fair returns here, showing its origins going all the way back to prehistory, just like they suggested there. It's cute that Marl gets into it and asks Chrono for a dance. For another, Luca gets drunk. It's a funny contradiction of what we would expect from her archetype. The reclusive scientist gets drunk and way too into a party. Isla challenges Chrono to a drinking game, and unlike the soda drinking game from the Millennial Fair, this one is actually beatable. She gives you the Dreamstone for beating her, and that's exactly what we needed in order to progress. The party goes to sleep after a long night of fun with their new friend. Upon waking up, Luca notices that the gate key is gone, which means that the party can't return to the end of time or anything. All around them are reptile footsteps. The camp was raided in the middle of the night. Isla runs after them and we go into the forest maze. No, not the one with the bumpin' music from Super Mario RPG. The other forest maze from a Super Nintendo RPG developed by Square featuring work from Takashi Tokita. Here we find Kino, who is Isla's boyfriend. Kino was jealous of Chrono, so he stole the gate key, but now the reptiles have it. So Isla finally joins our party after physically abusing Kino in a scene that's played as funny for some reason. Isla is my least favorite party member. She's really useful in battles due to her high strength, but that's really about it. She's a one-note character who doesn't do much of anything in the plot. I also just hate the way cavemen talk in this game. It's annoying. Going through this forest maze isn't really a maze, it's more like just a long winding corridor full of enemies, but at least the lighting is really pretty. The environments in this game, I'm telling you, there's something else. At the end of the maze is the Reptite Lair, which is an incredibly forgettable dungeon, at least if you're playing through the game normally. If you're trying to get all the items, this dungeon is a hell unto itself. Basically, to access the other passageways in the dungeon, you have to wait for these weevil beetle guys to dig holes in the ground for you to jump down. Seems easy enough, right? Wrong. These guys take forever to drill, and where they drill is completely random. You have to wait for them to drill in precisely the correct spots in order to get where you want to go exactly. This one section took about 10 minutes for me to get all the items from. I hate it. At the end of the dungeon is Azala, the leader of the Reptites, and an interesting character in her own right. She's confused by how humans were able to build something like the gate key before she sticks her bodyguard Nisbel on us. This boss is similar to Masamune. Instead of wind energy, he stores up lightning energy, and there's no way to break it. However, the defense buffs from lightning attacks stack on him, which makes him pathetically easy. I think his design is pretty funny at the very least. After this, Azala just gives up and runs away. And we're taken back to Isla's hut. Azala has a really cool design and some interesting character moments later, but for now she's not really much to talk about. And that's kind of this visit to prehistory on the whole. I've gone on record as saying that this visit is one of the few things I'd cut from this game if I had to cut anything from it. I don't think it really adds anything to the narrative. The second visit, which will come up later, is far more substantial. The gang returns the two halves of Masamune and the red dreamstone to Melchior, and he questions how we were able to find it before brushing it off and helping us fix it. Luca walks us through the process with him in an endearing scene of getting to see her build something with help from a mentor. Once that's done, we have the Masamune. He tells us to be careful with it, then immediately tries to sell his weaponry. Upon returning the reforged Masamune to Frog, along with the hero's badge, Frog will tell us that he needs a bit to think before he makes his decision. As we stay the night, we get to see some more of Frog's backstory. Throughout the course of our time in 600 AD, it has been pretty common to hear people talking about a hero named Cyrus. Well, now we see what happened to him 10 years ago. He and a guy named Glenn went to go fight the Frog King and get the hero's badge. There's data in the game that suggests the Frog King was going to be a boss fight, but was cut. I personally think it would have been cool if he could play this flashback and Cyrus and Glenn were temporary party members, but whatever. At the end of this flashback, we get our first look at Magus as an ominous theme plays. One of the coolest designs of any RPG character. This is just after Glenn and Cyrus have found the Masamune. He strikes down Cyrus and turns Glenn into a frog. Our frog. Masamune breaks in half and the hero's badge is lost. I've always thought this was a little bit clever, because seeing this cutscene for the first time, you kind of assume that Cyrus is the one who turned into Frog. Frog is a great hero after all, but instead it's the meek squire who we've never even heard of before. It's a really cool twist on things. Frog resolves to rejoin our party and gains the Masamune. Now we take him to the cliffside from earlier, and oh look! He knocks on the cave wall before looking deep inside himself to get another flashback. It's revealed that he was a kid who wasn't very good at fighting, and was later convinced by Cyrus to become a knight. Despite being better at swordplay, Frog never wanted to hurt anyone, and that prevented him from following Cyrus. He was still Cyrus's apprentice though, and eventually had to take up the blade. Frog musters all his good memories and opens up the cliff in front of us to reveal a magic cave. This animation is really cool and is one of my favorites in the game. It's so cinematic. The game really leans on this aspect of it and I love every second of it. Then the party walks in, and almost immediately walks out. You see, the moment we walk in and get into an encounter where we use magic, Frog gets suspicious and asks us how we know magic. It's here where we can take him back to Specchio and teach him magic. Frog is water type, just like Marl. Also, this dialogue will trigger no matter what you do in your first encounter here. I guess Frog really just wants to get some magic going. On the subject of doing things not related to the current objective, we can also take him to see Chrono's mom. She'll call him a pet and tell him to stay outside, which Frog is obviously demeaned by. We can also talk to Luca's dad, Taban, to get a special piece of equipment for her. One of my favorite aspects of Luca's character is the bond she has with her father. It's not common in RPGs to have this sort of father-daughter relationship. Taban makes her some pretty good gear over the course of the game, and it's good to check back here periodically for more. Anyway, returning to the magic cave, you may notice a little bat buddy start to follow us around. Pay him no mind, he's just a little bat buddy. There are a lot of rats in the cave, but that's about it, and we emerge on the other side of Magus Castle. I personally brought Marl with us, considering it's her kingdom at stake, but the only two characters you're forced to bring are Chrono and Frog. The bat continues to follow us. Again, pay him no mind. Instead, look at the huge castle Magus has. It towers above the party and sets the mood perfectly for what's to come. It really shows just how dedicated Chrono Trigger is to providing spectacles like this. Also, I love how in the intro music you can hear some of the Manolia Cathedral leitmotif from earlier in the game, a place known for being occupied by Magus. Going inside, you'll find that nobody's home. There are a few phantoms pretending to be loved ones of your party members. Chrono's mom, Queen Lean for Frog, King Guardia for Marl, Taban for Luca, and Luca for Robo. He really does see her as a motherly figure. It's cute. Of course they're fakes, and they'll attack you later when the castle becomes alive. For now, though, Ozzy welcomes us in and tells us that in order to get to Magus, you have to slay all 100 of the fiends in his castle. Despite him saying this, there are way more than 100 fiends in his castle, and you don't have to slay a lot of them. I don't know if this is just a translation thing or what. You can tackle the West Wing or the East Wing first. I typically tackle the West Wing first. Dungeon Masters always go left. Enemies here aren't particularly notable, but at the end of the West Wing we get our first encounter with the Master Swordsman himself, Slash. After an easy boss fight, he leaves his sword behind and Chrono can use it, which I've always thought was really neat. Being able to use a trophy from someone we've defeated has always been a cool concept to me in a video game. It's a way of showing a material sense that you've actually grown from your experiences. I don't know, I just really like how it connects the metaphor of growth that is common in RPGs to something physical within the game. The other boss is Flea. He's really easy, just a weird yellow blob magician that takes all of your MP away when you kill him. Oh wait, that's not the real Flea. The real Flea is the Bat Buddy who's been following you the whole time. He transforms into a human shape, and he reveals that he's a really feminine man. I honestly don't think Flea is bad representation. I mean, I'm sure the intentions behind his creation were probably not great, but in the text itself, he's just a GNC male. Maybe even a feminine presenting trans man. I appreciate you, Flea. But he's still an easy boss. Trust me, the bosses in Chrono Trigger are largely uninteresting for now. We'll get back to that in just a bit, actually. I would go into more detail about what goes on in this dungeon, but honestly there isn't a lot to say beyond the incredible aesthetic. So much of this dungeon is trivialized by using Frog and Marl's new dual tech, Ice Water. There's really not a whole lot going on here. The atmosphere is just unbeatable though. There's a really annoying room with some pits that Ozzy creates in a hallway. As much as I dislike this room because of how annoying it is, there's a really good gag in the pit you fall into. 2 of the save points are fake and turn into enemies. I just always thought that was cute. After a lengthy section of fighting more enemies, including some that juggle their defense types based on what they're attacked with, and a weird Donkey Kong reference, we finally reach Ozzy. He freezes himself in a block of ice, which makes it so we can't attack him or deal damage to him at all. However, next to him are some levers. If you hit the levers, it makes holes in the ground. Ironically, each one pretends the battle's over after you hit it. Once you've gone through all of them, the last one creates a pit that Ozzy falls into. The path to Magus himself is incredibly cool. There's a long, dark stairway full of bug-eyed bats, and at the end of it is a pitch-dark room. As you approach the Feed Lord, blue flames light up and pierce the darkness. Magus stands with his back turned and his cape billowing in the wind. To quote him, "The bitter black wind begins to howl." It's time to fight the most well-designed boss in the game. I don't even know where to start with how well-designed Magus is. The fact that, due to encounters appearing on the map, your stats are perfectly designed for you to barely pull out a victory on him, Magus' spellcasting animation being badass as hell, how the Masamune actually has an effect on him outside of damage that lowers his magic defense, him having 6,666 HP because he's a Fiend Lord, the fact that this is one of the coolest moments of the game with how everything is built up to this point, the fucking music. Essentially, one of the things that makes this fight so great is that no matter what your party composition is, you will come in at a significant disadvantage. Magus has access to all the elements, Magus knows every trick you can pull, and worst of all, Magus can only be damaged by one specific element during each form change. Since you can only have 3 party members at once, you will always be missing one element, be that fire or shadow. If you bring Marl like I did for extra healing, you'll be down 2 elements. It's super intelligent and it's my favorite boss in the game, if not one of my favorite bosses in any RPG ever. The atmosphere is perfect, the gameplay's intersection with player choice phenomenal, and everything about the presentation is spot on. No sooner is Magus defeated than he tells us we messed something up and a gate is open that whisks the 4 characters away. We also learn here that Magus didn't create Lavos, he summoned it. That was the ritual he was performing when we entered. But from where, though? This part of the game opens with a weird dream sequence where Chrono is an adult who has married and moved in with Marl. Apparently the 2 of them are living off their father's income, which Marl says is unacceptable for some reason. Doesn't she know how being royalty works? I mean, I agree that it's a bad thing, but most royalty would disagree with you. Plus, it's kind of a job in and of itself. It's a scene that I don't really like. It's kind of unnecessary and weird. I think it's supposed to be funny, but it's not really funny. Like, not in an offensive way. It's just boring. Like, it's just not a funny joke. Chrono wakes up from the stream to Isla calling his name. The party is back in prehistory. Isla tells us that she found us near the mountains, and of course Frog immediately tries to find Magus, but he has vanished. Just before we can orient ourselves properly, someone says the peaceful opposite village to the one Isla hails from, Laruba, has been burned down in a fire. She runs off and the game indicates that we should too. This whole section never really made sense to me from a plot perspective. It's not the next logical conclusion for the party to make. It's probably one of the few times in the game where I feel like the party is taking an unnecessary detour. I guess it could be justified as them looking for Magus, or maybe where Lavos was born? At the very least, Frog never really says why he stays with the party, which is weird. I have to rationalize it as him trying to find Magus and finish him off, I suppose. When you arrive at the now-revealed Laruba village, you find it up in flames. Isla argues with the chief about pacifism and talks about how sometimes you need to use violence to protect people, in less complex words than that of course, and he gives her permission to use the pterodactyls and the pterodactyl necks. We go up there and she insists on going alone, but after some convincing, she allows us to go with her. Something interesting to note in the pterodactyl nest is that you can see a faint red star in the background. Curious. The party rides on the pterodactyls up into the sky, giving us our first taste of something that can traverse the entire world map without any limits, but we basically explored everything in prehistory besides our next destination already anyway. There is a weird cave called the Sun Keep though. We land in front of the Tyranno lair and get met with the only good dungeon in all of prehistory. Yeah, I said it. The Tyranno lair is a fantastically designed dungeon. I mean, I know I keep stressing this point, but fuck, the music is so good. And in the first room, it plays over the battles too. That's such a cool touch that this game does very often, but it's deserved every time. It's hard to describe what I love about the Tyranno lair. There's just so much cool about it. Fighting dinosaurs on the railing, busting out caveman prisoners, a weird teleporting room, the rematch with Nizbel, it's all so cool. You also get access to some of Isla and Chrono's better dual techs here, and those are pretty fun to watch despite my dislike of Isla. When you get to the end, past the throne room that is surprisingly reminiscent of Magus's, you meet Azala again. Azala is such a strange and interesting character, and it's reflected very well here, after her boss fight with a giant dinosaur of course. Once you finish this fight, which has an incredibly forgettable mechanic, Azala accepts her defeat. The entire time she's seen the coming of the red star that we saw in the sky earlier as the end of the earth as it will usher in an ice age. She thinks that even though the reptiles have been totally slaughtered by the humans, she is ultimately won because the deaths of all humans will be far more drawn out and painful. I like that the reptiles are portrayed as just like people through Azala. They aren't just brutal monsters. I'm not sure what that's worth, but I can almost certainly tell you that they're trying to say something here. It's just really muddied. As the red star falls, Isla looks up to it and gives it a name. A name that we will be incredibly familiar with, Lavos. This was where his name originated, a combination of the Iokan words for fire and big. I know this is a big moment to interrupt, but fun fact, Isla's name contains the Iokan word for fire, and she has a slight resistance to fire damage, like any character who's fire type. So, just Luca, I guess. Though she can't learn magic because it was after her time, she would probably be a fire type if she could. In her dying breath, Azala refuses to let Isla save her, so everyone escapes on a pterodactyl and leaves the reptiles to die as the Tyranno lair is buried under Lavos' landing, an entire civilization destroyed. There's an interesting narrative undercurrent about the passing of the torch of power between species, reptiles to humans to machines. It's an interesting circle of life that is never directly alluded to or really built on. After a charming scene with some tiny sprites similar to Last Underworld from Earthbound, we get to see a new gate open up in the crater where Lavos landed. Nobody knows what's inside it, so our party enters it. Also, you may have noticed that I barely talked about Kino throughout the entirety of my analysis of prehistoric times. That's because I think he's annoying and I don't give a shit about him. On the other side is an ice age, just like Azala said, but that's not the only thing going on here. There's a cave we can't go through and a teleporter. If we stand on top of it, we get taken to my favorite setting in the game. Welcome to the magical kingdom of Zeal, where philosophy is valued above all else. This was the kingdom that invented magic that Specchio mentioned when we first met him. It's a hyper-advanced society hiding in the dark ages between prehistory and the Middle Ages. It's one of the coolest surprises in the game. I love it. Plus, remember that awesome song from earlier, Corridors of Time? Well, it's the area theme here. But why? What does Melchior have to do with Zeal? Here there is so much to go into regarding the philosophy of Zeal, the idea of dreams and reality and how they intersect. It's very similar to Link's Awakening in some regards. How do we know what we see and feel is real? What is real? What isn't? One of the best introductions to any area we get in the game is from the first lady we meet here.
Welcome to the kingdom of Zeal. Did I remember to put pants on today?
Okay, well maybe that's not exactly what she said, but still, it's correct. Also, we see the return of the creatures that Masamune are, though this one is named Doreen. Their existence is never explained, but they could be creations of Zeal or beings that were attracted to the high magical power of Zeal from wherever they came from, similar to extra-dimensional beings in the Palladium RPG Rifts. Yeah, I went there. The existence of Zeal makes so much make more sense, like for example Robo and Lucas technology using magic powers. I assume that the machinery of Zeal was excavated at some point and reused in the robots of the future, especially because of the resurgence of Zeal doors, which are later explained to be an invention of Zeal architecture. So many questions start to come together at this part of the story. There's a funny reference to the classic line, "Am I a butterfly dreaming I am man?" but with the new additional verse added of,
"Am I a butterfly dreaming I am a man? Or am I a bowling ball dreaming that I am a plate of sashimi?"
The people of Zeal, despite their philosophical achievement, are portrayed as egotistical and horrible to those below them, who they call the Earthbound ones. Haha, Earthbound. In all seriousness, I'm not a fan of how this massive societal hierarchical imbalance is conflated with philosophical intelligence. But I think that this is the one time Chrono Trigger intended to have political commentary, and I think that it actually works pretty well. Zeal is a fascist state, and it's pretty evil, but a lot of the citizens who live there aren't. They're just victims of a terrible system, and instead of just one bad apple being the problem, the system itself is, as you find out later. Here we also find out there's a place called the Sun Keep, where the people of Zeal keep the Sunstone and charge it. That used to be their main energy source before they found out about Lavos, who is still sleeping inside the planet years after landing in prehistory. It is interesting to me that the corrupt state of Zeal uses an objectively worse source for fuel that destroys the environment, but it does mirror our state of affairs in the real world. Except gasoline doesn't turn people evil. Probably. Something else you can find here is a strange puzzle involving wind, water, and fire books. You're technically not supposed to know the answer to this until a bit later, but it's literally just a few screens later, so I think it's okay to go ahead with it anyway. If you do it, you get access to a room with a new. You can fight the news for a significant amount of tech points, which is pretty helpful. Nearby is a ledger on a table that says one of the greatest quotes in the game from Balthazar himself.
Our life begins with new and ends with new. This is the truth. This is my belief. At least for now.
This doesn't really mean anything to the average player, but to those who know Egyptian mythology, they'll find that it's actually a reference to the waters of life which Khepri made the universe from, which are simply called Nu. If you don't know that, however, it's still pretty funny. Before we move on, there's one more interaction I want to highlight. There's a young boy we meet here with blue hair and a purple cat following him. All he says is, then he runs away. The Black Wind howls? Where have we heard that phrase before? In the next layer of Zeal, there's even more interesting things to unpack. We learn more about the Queen and how cool she is. She even told a lady to burn a plant that she was given by one of the supposed gurus, the Guru of Life. We don't learn the names of the gurus, but we hear that there's one of Life, Reason, and Time. The Guru of Life apparently was banished to Mount Woe. Tell her not to burn the plant. It's important. Here we also get to keep tabs on how tabs are made, and one sneaky new keeps stealing tabs from them. Put a pin in that. It's quite possibly the most important plot thread in the entire history of video games. That sneaky new will have his comeuppance soon enough. An NPC here gives us a glimpse of the pyramid that we encountered way back in our first visit to Medina, revealing it's a place where Zeal equipment is kept. Take note of that for later. One more element-based puzzle is in this room, but on the other side this time is a single Poyozo doll. Inside it is the Black Rock, which is the first item that can induce a triple tech. Triple techs either involve chrono or they're induced by items like this, otherwise you can't perform them. We don't have the right party makeup or the right text to perform this one yet. Still, it's called the Dark Eternal, which is a super badass name. Our next destination is the Blackbird, which is a gigantic plane in the sky. You may remember the crazy old man in the future talking about how he created it. We learn here from a mysterious man in a cloak that this was built by the Guru of Reason before he scoffs at us and walks away. Kira also plays the theme that first played when we first saw Magus appear on screen, Zeal Palace, which also plays in the next area we visit after a series of teleports up a mountain. But what does any of this have to do with Magus? The Zeal Palace is another interesting area. There's a lot to learn and visit here. First of all, we can learn the most important part of the most important plot thread in all video games. We can learn how to scratch a Nu's back. Then we can take that knowledge back to the sneaky Nu who is stealing tabs and scratch his back, which will give us more tabs. Awesome. We can find Masamune playing here, which is certainly an odd detail. They don't seem to recognize the party at all, so they must not be time traveling and instead are very, very old. Back to the main story, we also learn here that the Guru of Reason built the Ocean Palace, another thing that the old man in the future claimed to have built. It's pretty reasonable to assume that the old man in the future is Balthazar, the Guru of Reason at this point. It's ironic then that he's lost his mind in the future. But how'd he get there? We also learn a mysterious prophet has arrived recently and has been whispering things to Queen Zeal. She trusts him because somehow he always has an accurate read on the future. Some NPCs here claim that because the Zeal Palace is the center of the Kingdom of Zeal, that must mean it's also the center of the universe. Yeah, they aren't being very subtle with this, which I appreciate. The name is literally Zeal, like zealousness. Being heavy-handed is a good thing sometimes, and I think it really works here. For some reason, publicly open to the people of Zeal is the bedroom of two people with blue hair. The boy we saw from earlier who mentioned the Black Wind, and his older sister. We find out that they're named Giannis and Shala, and the two of them are very close. Shala knows that her pendant is the only thing that can help the queen get Lavos' energy, but she feels she has to help her anyway. She gives Giannis a special amulet that will always protect him, but it's then ushered away by the queen. Also, he says his cat Alphador only likes him. Cute. Shala's theme is fucking fantastic, by the way. There's something familiar about it, too. A random NPC will tell you some hot goss that says Giannis is actually Shala's half-brother, but I'm going to say that's hearsay considering it's a mistranslation of the original text and not one I really care all that much about. It's a meaningless detail. There's another NPC who says that Giannis has very little magical ability despite being descended from Zeal, which is something to note. If we follow Shala, we can see her use her pendant to open a sealed door to get into the palace. Most notably is that the pendant that she uses resembles Marl's pendant, so there was something special about it. Trying to open the door with it doesn't work, so we'll need to find a way to power it up. If you go to the left, there's the Hall of the Mammoth Machine, the machine that converts the energy of Lavos to be usable for the people of Zeal. We power up the pendant using this and return to the sealed door. Ta-da! On the other side is that strange brown-haired man we met at the Blackbird, who we now learned is named Dalton, having a meeting with Queen Zeal, Shala, and the Prophet. The Prophet's design seems familiar. I wonder who that could be. After them being angry there's intruders, you get the Golem sicked on you. The Golem is a fight that you're supposed to lose, but you can actually win if you're strong enough. However, the outcome remains the same. You get put in Zeal's prison that looks remarkably similar to how Obi-Wan was incarcerated by Count Dooku in Attack of the Clones. Shala and Giannis break you out, but then the Prophet appears and forces Shala to banish the party out of the Kingdom of Zeal and its time period permanently. Now the party must find a way back because it's the closest lead they have on Lavos. Naturally, instead of following the main plot and trying to get back into Zeal, let's explore now that we have a pendant that can open up all the sealed doors and chests. The chests mainly contain new armor that absorbs elemental damage of certain kinds. There's no way of knowing this as the game never tells you, but what you have to do in order to get the best loot is check the version of the shield chest in the past but not open it, then go to the future and get it. I don't know why it works like that, it's really specific and unnecessary. There's also the sealed doors in the future we can open, but there's nothing really that interesting behind them, besides Isla's Charm Top, which makes stealing shit from enemies easier. I don't like using Isla, so this isn't really that useful for me, but stealing will make your life easier in this game generally. There are a few instances where you can get infinite tab stat upgrades exploiting this. One last thing worth investigating, the strange pyramid in Medina. We can finally open it up now. A new appears and tells us there are two treasure chests that we can open, one with a good defensive item and one with a good offensive item. Now I don't mean to be an asshole or anything, but the offensive item fucking sucks. Like sure it's a good sword for now, but it's outclassed very quickly. Pick the defensive option, the safe helm. It will be good no matter what up until the end of the game. There's no reason not to use it. After this a choice, the news says something about Balthazar and his duty finally being fulfilled and he goes somewhere. I assume he is the nude that we see in the future hanging out with Balthazar, which is a fun detail. There are a few other fun side things we can do right now. For starters, let's go to Guardia Castle in the Middle Ages. Frog is being heralded as the hero who defeated Magus, and if he's in your party, Queen Leene will congratulate him. The chef and the knight captain have reconciled their feud entirely. It's a nice bookend to what's been going on there. Something else interesting we can do right now is that we can actually return to Guardia Castle in the present now without being attacked by guards, this time with some of that overpriced jerky we can buy from that guy in Poor. If we go inside, the Chancellor will tell Marl that the king wasn't even there when Marl's mom died, which clearly upsets her. He also says that to apologize to the king, he should get him some jerky, which is apparently his favorite food. But giving it to him reveals that it's not. The Chancellor set it up to get banished for feeding the king food that's bad for his high cholesterol. A Chancellor? Evil? Taking Isla to meet Chrono's mom will have her tell her that she should put on more clothes. Unbased Chrono's mom policing people's bodies. Shaking my head. That's enough of that. Now time to try and find a way to get back to Zeal. There's one sealed door in the future that I neglected mentioning, the one behind Balthazar and his dome. Well, if we return there, Balthazar isn't there anymore. There's just the new, who's fast asleep. Going through the door on the other side, there's a series of recordings from the posthumous Balthazar, who apparently died. He tells us all about his great new invention, the Epic, a time machine that will allow us to go to any time period regardless of seals. Then he speaks to us directly through the new, having taken over its consciousness. He hands us the keys to the time machine and basically tells us to go crazy. Something that I find interesting is that you actually get to choose what the time machine is named. I mean, I always name it Epic, but it's a cool touch. Back in the Kingdom of Zeal's era, if we try to go through the Skygate back up to Zeal, we'll find it's blocked off. Instead, we can go to the cave that was previously inaccessible. This is the village of the Earthbound ones. The oppressed class of the Enlightened ones see themselves as above. Despite this, however, we know that Shala and Giannis come down to play with them frequently. We know that the Guru of Life is being kept on Mount Woe, which appears to be chained here, so after getting some advice from the Elder, we follow a path to get to that chain. At the bottom of the chain is a boss I really have nothing to say about other than it being fucking annoying. Literally everything you do gets countered, and the two beasts are only weak to fire and ice magic respectively. It's really lame. Climbing up the chain, we get to Mount Woe, which is a pretty standard dungeon aesthetically, but does have a new gameplay element to talk about. There are these guys who give us huge amounts of tech points. The only problem is that when you fight them, they take away all of your techs and have incredibly high evasion, so they wet you out until they can run away. If you do manage to kill them though, it is well worth the investment due to the insanely high amount of tech points they give you. This is an idea repeated with several monster types throughout the game, and I'm not entirely sure why. It's interesting the first time you encounter it, but then it just becomes repetitive. At least it forces you to think about battles differently. At the top of Mount Woe is a very forgettable boss fight with extremely good facial expressions, which is then defeated to reveal a block of ice. And who's inside? Melchior, of course. The Guru of Life. What the fuck? So it turns out that Melchior was once the Guru of Life, and judging by how he doesn't know the party at all, this was before he went to the present. It's ironic that the Guru of Life became a weapons manufacturer, instruments of death. Almost makes you wonder what irony befell the Guru of Time. We take Melchior back with us to the Earthbound village. At the Earthbound village, everyone basically agrees that the queen is evil and crazy, needs to go down, as a certain uncle might have said once. While this discussion goes on, Shala and Giannis visit, with Giannis being kind of a dick. During his visit, Dalton kidnaps Shala and threatens to kill everyone there unless she can help at the Ocean Palace with her pendant. Apparently the Mammoth Machine has been moved there. Before he can do anything, Dalton whisks her away and Giannis runs after him. Melchior gives Chrono an object called the Red Knife, which you can sadly not equip, and tells him to use it to destroy the Mammoth Machine once and for all. With Shala having opened the skyways for Dalton to bring her back up, we're able to use them to store in the Ocean Palace. On the way in, we finally get to fight Dalton. Dalton is a bit of a controversial character. He's a comedic villain like Ozzy, but he gets a lot more victories than Ozzy does. A lot of people find him annoying for this reason. I don't think he's that annoying, to be honest. He's generally pretty mild for me, and he gets one really good joke in later. His boss fight is pathetically easy though, and he escapes before you can do any serious damage to him. We enter the Ocean Palace, which is one of the coolest dungeons in the game. First of all, it does the thing where the music plays over the battle music, especially because this music is phenomenal. But second of all, it has such a striking visual design compared to everything else. It's hard to describe. It's magical, yet so industrial, so otherworldly and alien. Lava is everywhere, and it flows through lines in the ground to create a glowing effect, and haunting statues watch over you. The monsters encountered here are unlike any other. Monsters that defend each other, so you have to kill one to kill the other. Monsters that are only able to be hurt with a certain type of magic. Monsters that can only be damaged by physical attacks. Monsters that counter you depending on how close in proximity they are to each other on the map. There's a ton of crazy stuff, and it all comes together right when you might have begun the screen new. These enemies prevent you from using that strategy, and it's probably the best side of them that we've seen in the entire game. Along the way through the palace, through short snippets with Masamune and Doreen, we get to see what's going on with Shala and Queen's Heel. They're increasing the power of the man machine to dangerous levels, and considering how I use the word dangerous, that's a pretty scary thing. Once we get past another easy boss fight with Dalton's golems, just put them to sleep using Hypno Wave, guys, it's not that hard, you end up in the final room of the Ocean Palace. Chrono throws the ruby knife into the machine, but through the energy of the machine, it turns into the Masamune. Masamune appear and possess the blade, which finally explains all of that confusion. That's how Melchior forged it. All their efforts are too late, though. Lavos awakens and wipes the party in no time at all. Then the Prophet throws his cloak off, and guess who it is? Magus, that's right. Fuck yeah. For some reason, he ended up here after the battle with the party, and he's not fucking around. He tries to attack Lavos, but he fails spectacularly. He says that he's trained his whole life to defeat Lavos and he can't even hurt him, which doesn't really bode well for our situation. I love this sequence. You think you're finally at the end of the game, but not only is there significantly more content, but you can't even hold a candle to the main villain's power. You thought you were almost out? Please. You're barely close to defeating Lavos at all. And the cherry on top is that, as a last-ditch effort to save everyone, Chrono sacrifices himself. That's right, the silent protagonist player's stand-in dies. He's vaporized before the party's eyes. Shala rescues them, and in a particularly memorable line, she says,
Please don't hate Mother or our kingdom.
This is the ultimate low point. The only contemporary one I can think of that is near comparable is Final Fantasy VI's own big twist. Lavos' awakening causes the floating kingdom of Zeal to fall to the ground, which makes a massive tidal wave that submerges most of the earth. The enlightened ones and the earthbound ones are on equal footing now. The hierarchy has been shattered, which is a very interesting choice. Though it obviously eventually gets rebuilt when monarchism is introduced later in the timeline, it's interesting to see that for a while, the corrupt systems have been beaten. It's not a typical route for these kinds of stories to go in. Again, it's typically one bad actor that has to be defeated. So I appreciate Chrono Trigger a lot for this. The party awakens in a tent on one of the last islands left. An old man explains to them that the Epic washed ashore safely, and the Marl's pendant seemed to follow Marl when she washed ashore as well. The history of the pendant is finally fully understood, and it certainly has a mind of its own. Some exploration will have you find that there's a Nu who's a shopkeeper, which is awesome. Other than that, you find a civilization of people still hanging on. The lady with the plant and Alphador are even here. When we talk to the Elder, we're ready to take the Epic, before Dalton shows up. Then there's a really lame gag where the party turns around for no reason and gets knocked out by Dalton. Yeah, this is the one scene where I really get why people hate Dalton. That's a really undeserved win. The party awakens imprisoned on the Blackbird without any of their gear. There are a few ways to go about going through this dungeon. One is just to have Isla in your party so you can do fights without any consequences. But to fully engage with the dungeon's design, you shouldn't do that. The game intends for you to sneak around and try to find everything that you've lost, which is a bit annoying because before you get anyone's weapons back, being spotted by guards means being sent back to square one. There's a pretty funny way of getting out of your cell where you can pretend Frog or Robo's sick that I've always liked, but still not a very fun scenario. That being said, the dungeon is mechanically distinct in a way that a lot of the game's dungeons aren't, and I have to give it some praise for that. One really stupid thing about this dungeon is a particular tab that you can get here. Basically, it only spawns once you've gotten all of your stuff back for some reason. There's no way to know this. The only reason I know about this tab is because I looked up a guide to all the tabs in the game once. You also get to see that Dalton has made some modifications to the Epic, that being he has somehow made it so it can fly. Once you're on the deck of the ship, there's the second kind of those tech-locking enemies you found on Mount Wolfamiliar, and they serve literally the same function. It's just redundant. At the end of the deck is a fight with another golem. While the first two golem fights were forced slash battles that were actually winnable, this is a forced win battle. The golem will never attack you, counting down to something similar to the Black Tyranno that I glossed over earlier. However, instead of actually doing something, the golem will just say grumble and try it again. It's pretty funny. He leaves after saying,
I hate heights.
Dalton decides to take matters into his own hands and prepares the Epic for flight. It starts playing the main theme, but he tells them to stop playing that music and it starts playing Shot of Crisis instead. I've always liked this joke quite a bit, and it's a highlight of the character of Dalton for me. He starts shooting lasers at the Blackbird to try and get the party, but they jump onto the Epic and fight him directly. After a bit, he tries to summon a golem, but since there are none left, he gets sucked into the summoning hole himself. cue weird Chrono Cross connection, the DS port. The gang lands the Epic back on the ground and are thanked at the campground for getting rid of Dalton. Not before, of course, shooting the Blackbird out of the sky with the Epic's new lasers that you sadly never get to use. They hear whispers of a man in a mysterious cloak and a cape up to the north. When the party travels there, they see that Magus is standing alone, facing the ocean. He gives the party a speech about his past. He reveals that he was Giannis when he was a child and everything clicks into place. Why he hates Lavos so much, why he wants revenge, it all becomes clear. Magus' ascension to power in the Middle Ages was made even more impressive with the foreknowledge that Giannis wasn't particularly skilled with magic either. And now I'm going to convince everyone here that Yasunori Mitsuda is a musical genius. For starters, now we know why Zeal Palace played when Magus first appeared, but there's something else to talk about here. Battle with Magus, Shala's theme, and the Ocean Palace all have one thing in common. They all have the same Phrygian descending scale. Take a listen to a segment for each one. Fucking brilliant. Mitsuda, I fear your musical power. From Magus' flashback, we learn that Melchior and Balthazar were indeed thrown to the present and the future, respectively. But what about the third guru, the Guru of Time? Well, he was cast to the place of Time's least resistance, the End of Time. Gaspar remained there, and he eventually became the old man under the lamppost. We see that Giannis ended up in a clearing where Ozzy found him and presumably raised him, perhaps being sort of a teacher to him in the ways of magic. Magus then asks if you want to fight him. Frog denies, knowing that a fight won't bring Chrono or Cyrus back. Technically, there's a choice on whether or not to kill Magus here, but not killing Magus is infinitely better. Gameplay-wise, this isn't a very compelling choice, because it's obviously wrong to kill Magus because of what happens next. Story-wise, though, there is some reason to kill Magus, so the choice is weighted more evenly. You've seen what he's done to the world, so seeking revenge might be attractive to some players. Though I think it being so uneven gameplay-wise is a bad thing, I think that ultimately the narrative is strong enough that it works. There's a reason to choose either choice, and both choices feel organic. Seeing Frog's kindness, Magus has a change of heart and goes from mocking Chrono for attempting to fight Lavos to joining the side of the party. First of all, this is so fucking cool. Getting who you thought was the main villain for a long stretch of the game as a party member is sweet, especially when he's as cool as Magus. Magus comes equipped with the amulet that Shala gave him, which makes him immune to all status elements, proving that it protects him from harm. Plus, Magus is the only character who can use all magic types in battle. In fact, everything he could do in his boss fight he can do as a party member, besides the wall changes, because that would be pretty ridiculously broken. He has a magic barrier move that's kind of similar though. However, there is one major drawback to using Magus. Due to his unwillingness to work with the other party members, he can't use dual or triple techs. Well, there are a few triple techs he can use, but only when he's equipped with certain rocks. The Dark Eternal is just one of them, befitting a character as unquestionably badass as Magus. I also love how Magus uses a scythe. It's a terrible weapon, but he's just an edgy kid at heart who loves seeming cool. It's a cute touch. Also, he never gets spooked by anything, unlike other party members. Magus tells us that we can find a way to revive Chrono, but we'll need to find the Guru of Time. Unbeknownst to the party, but beknownst to us, the Guru of Time is at the end of time, his ironic fate doled upon him just like the others. No life, no reason, and no time. Before doing anything, let's talk about something I've neglected to mention until we got the final party member, the in-game poses. If you stand still on the world map long enough, your party members will do little poses. Chrono yells at you to get moving, which is ironic considering that he doesn't talk. Miles sits down, Luke reads a book, Robo powers off, Frog does that cute thing where he puffs out his little throat sack, Isla beats her chest, and Magus sticks his nose in the air. It's a cute detail. If we return to the commons where the earthbound ones are, you'll notice that if Magus is in your party, Alphador will follow him around. Even as an adult, his kitty recognizes him. That's adorable. As we hop aboard the Epic and try to go to the end of time, Magus notices something rising from the water. It's the Ocean Palace, which has now become a gigantic floating black airship dubbed the Black Omen. It's an ominous reminder of the power of Zeal, and not only that, it's in all eras besides prehistory and the end of time, which is terrifying. We'll tackle it in due time, don't worry. Let's get back to the old man at the end of time, Gaspar. He tries to blow us off at first, playing a song that's associated with both Chrono and Marl that he calls memories of Chrono, but I know for damn certain is listed on the soundtrack as Epilogue to Good Friends. I mean, it's a good song. Eventually, once you try to leave, he gives you a time egg, which will supposedly help with saving Chrono. But there's another name for it, the Chrono Trigger. That's right, after about 15 hours of gameplay, we've finally gotten our hands on the Chrono Trigger, or as the game calls it due to character limits, the C-Trigger. He tells us to seek out Balthazar, who can tell us what else we can do to save Chrono. If we visit Specchio while we're here, he'll note that Chrono isn't around anymore, albeit in his own Specchio-y way. Balthazar tells us to find a body double of Chrono, and he says that we can find one wherever Norstein Beckler is. He doesn't know though. Luckily we do, remember? He's got his tent set up in the Millennial Fair because he loves parties. Norstein Beckler continues to be enigmatic and makes us play his bullshit minigame in order to get the doppelganger of Chrono. If you lose, you just pay money for it, which is what I want to do anyway. Jeez. It gets sent back to Chrono's house, and we have to talk to Chrono's mom to get it back in a really solemn scene. Luca lies to her and tells her that Chrono's alright. It's really somber. As a quick side note, while we're out time hopping, going back to the burned down Laruba village in prehistory reveals a single new who's sleeping there. He'll offer to change the names of party members and also hands us a white rock for a really lame technique. Poyozo dance sucks. Thanks. Anyway, with the doppel doll in hand, we return to Balthazar, who shoots some Poyozo dolls out to Death Peak so we can finally climb it. He seems really like those little guys. They pop up all over his architecture. Before we go, he has us shut off the new he's been using as a host body so it can finally sleep forever. Going up Death Peak is really annoying. There are a few obstacles here. First of all, the first screen has fast wind that will blow you back to the beginning if you don't hide behind the trees fast enough, which is a mechanic I'm not super fond of. Scaling further, you have to do some light puzzle solving and also fight some of Lavos' spawn, which to be fair is a really cool idea for a boss fight. Then there's a section where you can slip off and be forced to redo the whole thing, which really sucks. And then you have to push the shell of one of the Lavos spawn. It's not a terrible dungeon, it's definitely more memorable than most of them, but it's still a bit annoying. When we arrive at the top of Death's Peak, the party holds out the time egg and a solar eclipse happens. The time egg shatters and Marl and Luca give up hope, but then a gate sucks everyone inside it to the single moment before Chrono killed Lavos. Frozen time. Quickly, they swap out Chrono for the doll, revealing that Chrono never actually died. He was replaced with an identical doll the entire time. Once they escape, Marl and Luca rejoice, and one of them hugs him depending on your party layout. The gang's all back together. When you return to the end of time with Chrono, everyone will remark on how he's back, yes, including Specchio. Notably, Magus says you are whacked because you're weak. This is one of the few instances where I think Ted Woolsey's translation is pretty notably awful. That just doesn't seem like something Magus would say at all. Gaspar says that we have many ways to fight Lavos now. The Black Omen, the Bucket, and flying directly in 1999 AD in the Epic. However, before we indulge in that range of options, he tells us there's a ton of side quests to do. For once in an RPG, the endgame side quest roundup feels natural. After all, they're literally time travelers. They have all the time in the world. There's no ludonarrative dissonance to be had here. Lavos isn't going anywhere, so let's look into them, shall we? Let's talk about Frog, because this is his side quest. Frog is a character I think is incredibly solid. In fact, I did an entire video about him. He's got a very interesting narrative throughline. However, that being said, he's not really relevant to anything going on in the plot, and I've often found myself questioning his motivations after the battle with Magus. I posited earlier that maybe it was simply to find Magus, but now Magus is in the party. Maybe it's to keep an eye on him? Maybe it's part of his chivalrous duty to save the world? We never even see Frog learn what Lavos is if you never use him in your party. Out of all the characters, he is the most disconnected from the main plot. Yes, that includes Isla because she at least canonically knows what Lavos is. Going to a new city that we couldn't visit before due to lacking the wings of time, we find out a few things. First of all, the Black Omen being in the sky has been totally normalized. This is a really cool touch. It's been in the sky for thousands of years after all. It's basically like our moon, except more scary. Second of all, there's a mysterious crypt to the north. Going here, we find out that Cyrus's restless spirit is still around in an unwinnable boss fight. When Frog realizes this, he freaks out, and we decide to solve the mystery of Cyrus's restless soul. What follows is a wild goose chase where you have to do things in a really specific and stupid order of events in order to get anything done, which sadly undercuts the compelling emotional through line of this quest. Basically, you have to go to the ruins, clear out the monsters, find out the carpenter can't rebuild the ruins because he doesn't have his tools, go forward in time, ask the carpenter for his tools, get them from his wife, go back in time, give the tools to the carpenter, clear out the monsters, tell the carpenter to rebuild, clear out the monsters, and tell the carpenter to rebuild one last time. Yeah, it's pretty annoying. Once you do though, you get one of the most heartfelt scenes in the game. Frog gets to talk to Cyrus's ghost one last time and he lets go of his guilt. It's really touching. Then after that, Masamune appear and power up the Masamune. This moment is again undercut by the fact that one of them says mucho metaphysical, but whatever. This is actually one of my favorite gameplay details about this game. The ultimate sword, the Masamune, actually is the ultimate sword for Frog. Many games have it so the best weapon of Legend forever is actually not the best weapon in the game for that character. This is particularly prominent in the Zelda series, where the Master Sword is often outclassed by stuff like the Bigoron sword. It's really refreshing to see that the Masamune gets powered up and gets to be the best weapon Frog can have. Also, it's our first ultimate weapon. As an ad note, I love that Magus covers his eyes when the Masamune is powering up. It's a neat touch that his being the Fiend Lord doesn't allow him to look directly at it. Or maybe he's feeling guilty. Whatever the case, it's a very cool character detail. On our way out, make sure to pick up Marl's ultimate weapon, the Valkyrie, which is just hanging out here for some reason. Also, yes, that's how it's pronounced in this context. I've never understood why Marl's ultimate weapon was here, but there is a cute detail involving it. Chrono's next weapon upgrade is in a chest right next to her ultimate weapon. If you didn't realize, the game is pushing the Chrono and Marl ship pretty hard, and this is one of the subtler ways of showing it. Now that Frog is a changed Frog, if we return to Donadero Mountains, he can catch a gold rock due to his lack of guilt weighing on his mind, begetting an improved conscience. Cute. Our next side quest is an interesting one, because you can actually do it long before when we're choosing to do it. However, due to a scene later in it, I decided to do it when we had the full party together instead. It's probably my favorite side quest in the game after all. It has my favorite scene in the game. Do you remember Fiona? Well, near her house now is a swirling vortex in the desert. She's happy that her husband is home from the war, but she's pretty obviously concerned about that swirling vortex in the desert. I can't really blame her for that one. Apparently monsters are what's causing it, and the monsters are weak to water, so we bring Marl and Frog to deal some serious damage. After a rather underwhelming set of enemies that basically die when they get touched by any AoE water type attack, we reach the boss, Retinite. He's a Zombor reskin, though his mechanics are totally different. He's got a core that, when defeated, makes his other two halves go berserk. Despite being different mechanics-wise, he's still a boring boss fight that's ultimately way too easy. We return, and Fiona says she can't replant the forest by herself, and that it would need to be done over the course of many centuries. All hope seems lost, until something brilliant happens. One of my favorite things in the game. Robo volunteers to plant the forest instead, and says we can just travel to the future and pick him up there. It's one of the most clever uses of time travel in this game that intersects with character details in such a fun way. After leaving him there, for the rest of the game, even after you go and get him, you can see him in the Middle Ages planting seeds on the world map, which is just adorable. When you return to the present, you find that the forest has been finally grown, and there's been a cathedral built where Fiona's house once stood. Going inside, we can find a shop for high-end gear, and our poor friend Robo completely destroyed by time. We pull him down, and Luca gets to work repairing him. A line he has here has stuck with me.
What was for you but a short hop was for me 300 years.
It doesn't end there, though. The best scene in the game comes up next, with the entire party resting together as Luca fixes up Robo. Robo says that during the time he's been working, he's been developing a theory for why the gates have appeared. They aren't the work of Lavos as the party has hypothesized. Instead, Robo states that an external entity created the gates. That these gates were created as a way for it to relive its entire life as it died, sort of like how someone's life flashes before their eyes. Whatever this entity is, it's never explained, but this scene in the entire party discussing it together has always fascinated me. For one, it's the only scene where this kind of party-wide interaction occurs, but for another, it's just such a cool philosophical idea. This being greater than anything is having its life flash before its eyes, the history of the universe, and the party is getting to see it through their journey. It's super cool. I even got a diorama of this scene. After everyone falls asleep, Luca wakes up in the middle of the night. A special gate for her has appeared in the forest, and when you go through it, you're in her house, but 10 years before the events of the game. You find out from reading her diary that Luca hates science because it makes her dad pay less attention to her. And you find out from her dad's notes that the password to her special machine is the name of Luca's mother, Laura. When she goes into the living room, we see that Luca's mom can walk, but she gets her dress stuck in a machine and it starts to pull her towards it. We input the password before anything bad can happen, rewriting history and making it so Luca's mom can walk again. This accident invigorated Luca to start pursuing science more thoroughly and make her into the person she is today. Except in this timeline, the accident didn't destroy her mom's legs, so it just inspired her in a different way. Time finds a way, I suppose. When Luca comes out of the portal, she's greeted by Robo, who reveals a present he made for her, a green piece of amber he's been hardening in his body throughout the centuries. It's a really heartfelt gift, but it's a shame that it kinda sucks in battles. It's the Green Dream, an accessory that revives whoever is wearing it instantly once per battle, which isn't really that good considering the way more busted accessories you have. If you go back to Luca's house after doing this, you can see that history has indeed changed, and Luca's mom can now walk. She gets up and starts doing chores around the house, and implies that she has always done so. A new place we can travel to in the Middle Ages, due to our Wings of Time, is the fort where Ozzy has been hanging out after Magus' defeat. Honestly, there's really not a lot to talk about in this part of the game. There are a lot of great jokes. I really like when Ozzy brings up two monsters, the party gets in their battle poses, but then the monsters instantly die. Or the interplay between Magus and the various fiends who live there. They're really mad that he betrayed them, and he just doesn't give a shit. One joke I'd like to look at in more detail is a joke with Ozzy and this guillotine. He has a treasure chest behind it, but if we just ignore it, we'll be able to grab it safely, though not without the needless death of an imp. Sorry, imp, but what I think is most funny about this scene is that the best treasure chest in the room isn't even right there. It's in a hidden passageway below Ozzy that he would be able to see. It's Magus' ultimate equipment, not just his ultimate weapon, which further serves to distance him from the rest of the party. His ultimate weapon, the Doom Sickle, further shows how he works best alone. When a party member dies, he deals an additional 100% of damage with his regular attack. That's a lot. Unfortunately, his techs are simply more useful, but still it's crazy and a really neat feature for a weapon to have. When we finally confront Ozzy, Flea, and Slash, they all have upgrades that you can charm off of them with Isla, but I never use Isla, so it doesn't really matter. What I think is funny is that Ozzy has the Ozzy Pants, which is the worst helmet in the game. Yes, a pair of pants is the worst helmet in the game. It lowers all your stats to 0 and it makes you have all status conditions at once. The boss fight itself is really unique too. The 3 combatants all have different triple techs that they use on you, which is a clever reversion of the combat strategies that you used against them when you fought them back in Magus' fort. Of course, when Slash and Flea are defeated, Ozzy runs away and hides in his ice barrier once more. This time the lever to drop him is the wrong one and drops us instead, but upon climbing back up, a random kitty hits the switch that drops him instead. Thanks, kitty. In the distant future, Robo has some unfinished business himself. If we go there, there's a dome we haven't visited yet called the Genodome, which is short for Genocide Dome. This doesn't seem suspicious at all. When we go in, Robo bypasses the security systems and leader of the robots, Mother Brain, threatens to kill us. Yes, she's named Mother Brain. Small world, huh? Joking aside, the way she talks about robots taking over and picking up the pieces that the humans left behind when Lavos attacked is actually really interesting. It sort of reinforces the cycle that I referred to earlier. The humans did the same thing to the reptiles a few million years ago. I think it's fascinating how the game examines this sort of cycle of new life replacing old life, even if unintentionally. This is actually one of the more involved dungeons in the game, by which I mean there are puzzles you have to think about. That being said, they're fairly obtuse and annoying. You have to find Payozo dolls. Hey, maybe this place was built by Balthazar, through doing really obscure and menial tasks, like lining up 2 robots by getting the one to follow you a ridiculous length, or supercharging Robo to overload part of the system. There's also a part where Robo can run jump into a switch on the wall, which is a neat visual spectacle, but is basically functionally just the same as pushing a switch. However, on our way to Mother Brain, we encounter a pink R-series robot, who is named Atropos. She tells us that Robo was built to be a spy among humans and sell their data to the Mother Brain megacorporation. I mean, she was supposed to tell them their secrets so Mother Brain could destroy the humans. Robo says she's lying, she calls him Prometheus, which isn't a reference that makes much sense to me, like he doesn't light the way for other robots or anything, and then the 2 of them fight. This can be a fairly challenging boss fight simply because only having Robo in your party for a fight is kind of difficult. He's really slow and she deals a lot of damage, so you have to know when to heal. Once you beat her, she apparently comes back to her senses and gives Robo her ribbon, which gives it some permanent stat boosts and is not an accessory. Awesome! Sure, Robo is sad after seeing another close friend die in his multi-100-year existence, but stat buffs. Before we go to Mother Brain, we get to see a conveyor belt that tells us why this place is called Genocide Dome. It's converting humans into energy. It takes them and just kills them. It's pretty dark. None of it is shown explicitly on screen, but the implication is pretty obvious. However, Robo reveals that there's nothing we can do to save them, but despite Lucas' protests. We have to defeat Mother Brain before we can get anywhere. So, defeat Mother Brain we shall. Mother Brain is an interesting boss fight because, much like the Golem Twins, it is one of the only boss fights where Lucas' Hypno Wave is actually really useful. Putting all the monitors to sleep so they can't heal Mother Brain is a godsend. That being said, it also makes the fight a complete joke. Killing Mother Brain actually gets you Robo's 2 ultimate weapons, the Terra Arm and the Crisis Arm. The Terra Arm deals the most damage consistently, but the Crisis Arm deals more damage depending on how high the final digit in Robo's HP is, though this is poorly explained. And by that I mean it's not translated well at all, it's literally just wrong. It says the lower Robo's HP is, the more damage it does, which is just incorrect. We're not going to be using Robo again, so none of this matters to me anyway, but the Crisis Arm is really good. Just simply keep Robo at max HP and it'll do wonders for you. This is another quest with some fun time travel implications, but before that we have to go to a place in the future, the former Sun Palace where the Sunstone was kept in the Kingdom of Zeal. This place has very Ocean Palace-y architecture. There are strange gargoyle statues everywhere and lava lines the floor, of course. However, here we encounter the Guardian of the Sun Keep and also the worst boss in the game, the Son of Sun. This guy is an eyeball with 4 flames surrounding him. You have to hit the right flame to deal damage to him. The only problem is that it changes randomly and there's no way of knowing which one it is. It's a really annoying fight of attrition and eventually you just win. He turns into a dried up sunstone and Luca has a brilliant idea. We go back in time and leave it in the sun in prehistory so it can power up into a full sunstone and we can use it to make weapons. However, the plan quickly backfires because someone in the present steals the sunstone. We find out it was stolen by the greedy mayor who lives in poor and he asks for a huge amount of money for it. But instead of giving into that, if we can instead give his ancestors some beef jerky for free, he'll be generous and gives us the sunstone back. jerky fixes everything. Once we get the fully charged Sunstone, Luca turns it into her ultimate weapon, the Wonder Shot. I say ultimate weapon loosely here, because it has a very high chance of doing shit amounts of damage. However, I still equip her with it anyway because we're only going to use her for one more encounter anyway. Her dad makes something way better for us, the Sunshades. This is one of the most broken accessories in the game. It increases all, and I mean all, of your damage output by 25%. Not just attacks of a specific type, literally every single point of damage you deal is increased by 25%. It's really, really good. If it weren't for another accessory a little bit later, I'd even say it was the best one in the game. The final side quest we have to do has to do with Marl, but first let's talk to Toma. Remember Toma, the guy who was searching for the Rainbow Shell in 600 AD and ran away with some guy's money? Yeah, that guy. Well, he actually found the location of the Rainbow Shell and is going to go look for it. However, he tells us that we should pour some soda on his grave and he'll show us where it is. Okay, hopping to the future, we can find his grave and pour his soda on it. Somehow his ghost appears and points to where the Rainbow Shell is in 600 AD. Thanks? Let's hop back to the past and investigate. When you go into one of my favorite optional dungeons in the game. A note on the ground talks about holes that can be used to return to the surface, from Toma. He must have died here. Then you enter the main layer of the place, the beat drops, and you realize this is the submerged Tyranno layer. This is such a kick-ass idea for a dungeon. Exploring a decrepit place you were in millions of years ago? That being said, aside from it being super fucking cool, I really don't have that much to say again. Much like the original Tyranno layer, it's just self-evidently cool. You find an item called the Blue Rock here, which, while not super notable, is pretty cool in that it gives you the strongest triple tech in the game, Omega Flare. It's pretty awesome that it combines both the most powerful magic users of the team, Magus and Luca, and also calls upon the inherent synergy between Luca and Robo. At the end of it, after a rematch with the Black Tyranno, we encounter the Rainbow Shell. It's too much to carry ourselves, so we get the Guardia Royal family to drag it out for us. Awesome. Not awesome is their response in the present when we go to pick the shell up. Marl's father is now on trial for purportedly selling the Rainbow Shell from the treasury. There's a particularly funny line here about even kings are subject to the country's laws. I'm just like, no, they aren't. That's not how monarchism works. That's part of why it's a bad thing? Like, I don't know what to tell you, Chancellor. You go in the basement and fight some monsters that were in Magnolia Cathedral. Wonder what they're doing here. It almost brings to mind the amount of monsters in the jail from the beginning of the game, and get a piece of the Rainbow Shell to prove Marl's father's innocence. While we're down here, we find a note from Queen Leene written ages ago. It's basically bioessentialist nonsense that says Marl should just make up with her dad because they're blood related or something. Whatever. We go back to the courtroom, Marl breaks into the stained glass window, and it turns out the Chancellor is actually Yakra's descendant the whole time. I've always loved this twist because the whole Yakra Chancellor trial thing felt like an early game thread that was dropped soon after it was introduced. But it wasn't. It also explains why monsters are all over the royal family's place. Yakra claims to know the party's moves, but then you beat him super easily. Marl and her dad make up, and we free the real Chancellor. Then something unexpected happens. Melchior shows up and uses the Rainbow Shell to forge some equipment. He's able to make 1 prism dress or 3 prism helms, the former being the best magic defense for 1 female party member, and the latter being the best magic defense for any 3 party members. I always go for the dress. It's not a huge deal anyway, the game really isn't that hard. Then of course you get Rainbow, Chrono's ultimate weapon, which has a super high crit rate and is just really cool. Finally, you get the Prism Shades, which are the best accessory in the game. They just do what the Sun Shades do, but add another 25%. That's plus 50% damage per hit. It's ridiculous. I'm not even sure how this accessory was left in the game, honestly. With the entire party stronger, there's only one thing left to tackle. The Black Omen, the Ocean Palace risen from, well, the ocean. Let's start with one of my favorite things about the Black Omen. If you try to go to it in the future, since Lavos has already won, the Queen just locks you out. I think that's pretty funny. Anyway, you can tackle it in any era after Zeal. If you do them from present to Zeal backwards, you can clear it out 3 times. That's a lot of loot and XP. Now for my actual dissection of the dungeon. It's really cool. First of all, it's such a menacing recontextualization of the Ocean Palace itself. I love how the music that plays in the background is so calm. It's incredibly ominous. Also, Queen Zeal says all of the people of Zeal are living here eternally, but you never actually meet any of them. You just encounter monstrous alien beings, and also Gato robots. Is this what's become of the people of Zeal who were in the Ocean Palace? They were transfigured into these creatures? Pretty scary thought. There's also a pretty creepy room with clones of all the party members besides Magus and stasis pods. Zeal's been waiting for ages. Unfortunately, despite this being the final dungeon, it's really not all that much more difficult than the other dungeons in the game. There are a few variations of one boss fight that recurs throughout it, but they're all easy. But then you get to Queen Zeal, finally face to face with her, and you get one of the best boss fights in the game. In fact, I think she's the best designed behind Lavos and Magus. Though she's not particularly difficult, Frog's tech Frog Stomp is very useful on her as an example due to her move where she reduces the party to 1 HP. She's so well designed. The interlude fight with the Mamma Machine is also excellent. I love that the Masamune saps HP from it, because it was designed to counteract the Mamma Machine by Melchior after all. Finally, you get Battle with Magus to play when you refight Queen Zeal's second form when he's in your party. This fight is amazing. It's designed specifically to be good against Magus, which is a great touch. It's almost like his personal hesitation in fighting her represented through gameplay. All of his techs hit multiple targets, and if you hit multiple targets in this fight, you get countered devastatingly. It's brilliant. With Queen Zeal defeated, there's only one thing left to do. Let's wrap this up. The battle with Lavos is in 3 stages, and each one is pretty cool. If you remember from before, I didn't elaborate on the Lavos boss fight that much earlier. That's because I'm going into it here due to the massive amount of spoilers it has. Lavos copies a ton of bosses from across your journey. We won't find out why that is until a bit later in the fight. After this boss rush, a hole is created in his shell. In the second phase, after a small corridor through his belly, you fight a version of Lavos that looks kinda like Shell from Dragon Ball. And this version has an attack that looks like the Day of Lavos, the apocalyptic event itself, which I've always thought was a neat touch. Other than that, it's basically the same as Giga Gaia from Mount Woe. 2 arms, 1 head. Nothing really to write home about. Then what emerges from the remains of that version of Lavos is what my father lovingly describes as a space duck. Somehow Magus deduces from this that Lavos has been raising humans as cattle this entire time. Their entire evolution, their entire history was just for Lavos to learn from and eat. It's a really terrifying twist and amazing premise for a villain. I fucking love it. It's very Full Metal Alchemist. It's also why he's been copying bosses. He absorbed their DNA too. The battle itself is utterly excellent. Lavos uses his powers as a parasite outside of time in order to hurl the party to every time period imaginable. Each one equips him with a different set of skills. My least favorite is prehistory because of his giant rock technique. In order to defeat Lavos, you have to kill the core on the left to get the core on the right to lower his defense. The big space duck in the middle? That's not actually Lavos. The tiny core on the right is, which is a really good way of representing the true parasite. It's a really fun fight. Lavos is defeated and a bunch of time periods flash before our eyes before Chrono wakes up at home. A soldier's there who tells him that he's going to be executed. Wait, what? Didn't we patch things up with the king earlier? The king and the chancellor discuss how Chrono's actions have impacted the kingdom greatly, then reveal that they aren't mad at all. They found out through the help of Luca bringing together all the people of the past and future that Chrono saved the world, so the parade is held in his honor. But when you play the parade, who do you get to use? Marle. She's the emotional core here. Chrono is the player stand-in, but now it's her time to shine. We get to see Luca's mom tell Taban that they should dance together, Chrono's mom tells him to feed his cat, and Melchior talks about how he doesn't have to make weapons anymore. It's a touching ending. We reach the gate and everyone has to return to their own time. Kino and Isla go back with a sex joke, Magus leaves without a word, Frog and the King leave with Marle kissing Frog because princesses always kiss frogs at the end of stories, and when Robo and Doen leave, an interesting existential question is posited. Luca freaks out because she thinks that Robo might no longer exist in the future due to the fact that they changed it. Robo reassures her that any good future would have a place for him in it, which really doesn't address what she said, but whatever. With that all wrapped up, Luca decides to dismantle the epic. We never really found out what the entity was, but whatever it was, it seems satisfied now. But before the gate can close, Chrono's mom chases his cats into the portal, and so they're off in the epic again on another adventure. In a cute ending montage, you can see all the party members watching the epic fly across the sky. Good thing there are only 6 dates in history, or else finding Chrono's mom might have been an issue. The game ends with a shot that simply reads, "The End," on a picture of the Earth. But of course, like all things about Chrono Trigger, there is another curveball. This is far from the end of the game. Here's a fun fact that I bet you've never heard before. Chrono Trigger invented the concept of New Game Plus. Yes, it not only refined and polished a bunch of ideas about the RPG genre, but it created this entirely new mechanic. Granted, you could argue this sort of idea stems back to the early days of gaming, with there being a second quest in Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda on the NES. But this is different. The New Game Plus lets you keep all your abilities from your previous save file and re-experience the same adventure. Fitting in a game about time travel, and especially fitting in a game full of so many decisions. Depending on when you fight Lavos, the ending is subject to change. We'll be going over all the endings, but for now I'm going to be looking at some decisions you can make differently in a New Game Plus run. Most of the game is sadly pretty much the same, however there are a few key differences in my run. For starters, Fiona's Forest never appears because I told the lead at Zeal to burn the plant. The people who had the Moonstone stayed greedy because Chrono sold the jerky to the lady in the past for a profit, who can botch saving Luca's mom and have her be permanently crippled. Most importantly, Magus died on that cliff. Frog didn't forgive him and the two fought it out to the death. His defeat brings a major change in the story. When Magus dies, the curse on Frog starts to revert, and eventually he becomes a human again in the ending. It's really cool to see Frog as a human, and the sprites they did for him would have been neat to see in action in-game. It's also a neat trade-off for killing Magus, though later versions would ruin this by having him become human again regardless of whether or not you killed Magus. The entire setup with Frog fighting Magus on the cliff is so cool. It's framed as a 1v1 between the two of them, and Magus is tired and dejected after having seen Lavos' full power. Frog easily overpowers Magus because Magus isn't fighting to win. Then you get Magus' amulet after killing him. This might be my favorite choice in the entire game. So much consequences behind it. You lose a party member here permanently, but Frog gets to be a human again. It's great. The cherry on top is that if you use the epic to crash into Lavos, which is conveyed through an awesome Mode 7 sequence, and beat him, you not only skip the boss rush, but get a totally different ending where Marl and Chrono, float away on balloons? Yeah, it's kind of a weird one. There are a lot of endings like that. One of the strangest endings is also the hardest to get. Basically, in a New Game Plus playthrough, you might have noticed that there's now a green light on the telepod to the right of Luca at the Millennial Fair. If you go inside it, you'll see that it goes directly to Lavos. Yeah, you have to beat Lavos using only Chrono and Marl. It's pretty easy just because you undoubtedly have a ton of Mega Elixirs at this point, which utterly break the game. A full heal for the entire party? Yeah, I'm going to abuse that. After this, you go to the developer's room. Here you can meet all the people who worked on the game. There's a bunch of jokes that make me feel sad about the crunch the team went through, and also a funny fake-out where Tetsuya Nomura pretends to reset the game. That cheeky bastard can even get me outside of Kingdom Hearts. I really love the Dream Team room. Everyone besides Nobuo Uematsu gets their own sprite here. For some reason, his is just Norstein Beckler. Once we're done talking to the Dream Team, they show us the credits, but really fast because we beat the game so quickly is a final joke. There are a few other endings, but I don't think there's a whole lot to go into with a lot of them. There's one where Anu and a frog play together as friends, for instance. Herein lies my problem with most of the Chrono Trigger endings. They just don't feel like anything other than gags. I mean, it's fine I suppose, but they don't really add a whole lot to the overall narrative of the game. People talk about this game having multiple endings as if it's an integral and super interesting feature of it, but most of them are just whatever. The one where Luca and Marl rape Ben is kind of funny, if a little gross, I guess. Chrono talks in it, which is weird. Of course, there are a few endings that I do like. I really love the Riptide Age one, where if you don't kill the Black Tyranno before defeating Lavos, everyone in the future is dinosaurs. I've always loved this one, not only because it makes logical sense as compared to a lot of the endings, but because it was how I was introduced to Chrono Trigger as a kid. My dad used this to explain the concept of multiple endings and said that if you didn't go back in time and defeat the dinosaurs, they would take over the world. I always thought that was so cool as a little kid, and I thought about it a lot. Also, the joke of the Riptide Runner and the foot brace just being a human is very funny. If you beat Lavos without bringing Chrono back to life, you essentially get an alternate version of the regular ending where everyone returns to their own times, before Gaspar forces them all together and makes them use the time egg to bring him back to life. That cheeky old bastard, Gaspar. I think this ending is really just to give closure to that plotline. Though I ultimately think that by having Chrono come back anyway, no matter what you do, it sort of undermines the choice to let him stay dead. Also, if you killed Magus before this, we get to see some more of Frog's human sprites, which are awesome. Frog is so cool. It's also fun when Marl asks what's going on, we get to see a rare moment of Magus holding in his laughter. He knows about the time egg and is just snickering away about it. Classic Magus. One more fun one before I get to my favorite. What the Prophet Seeks. This is where Magus goes to kill Lavos by himself in the Ocean Palace as the Prophet, basically going through his original plan before Chrono and the gang sorta mucked it up. There's one line from here that has always stuck out to me.
If history is to change, let it change. If the world is to be destroyed, so be it. If my fate is to be destroyed, I must simply laugh. I'm coming for you, Lavos.
It's kind of edgy, but I like it. It sort of encapsulates Magus as a character. He's really try-hard, and on the inside, he's just a kid. He never really grew past that. I really like Magus, and I think he's a lot more layered than a lot of people think. My favorite of the extra endings is titled The Oath. Basically, if you beat Lavos before you beat Magus, Frog is unsatisfied and goes to fight Magus by himself. You get to see a cool series of scenes of him going through Magus' castle and single-handedly taking everyone out, then his confrontation with Magus. The two cross their weapons, and as the credits roll, you hear the sounds of them fighting in the background. Then at the very end, you see a silhouette on top of Magus' castle. You don't know whose it is. It's a really cool ending, and I don't think it gets enough love. I think the worst ending is the one where it's just a slideshow of all the characters in the game. That's it. Seriously. I ultimately think the time spent on multiple endings could have gone into either making less but more substantial endings or giving more content to areas like prehistory that were severely lacking. Whatever the case, it's a fun bonus feature that doesn't really impede on anything else anyway. There's one last thing I want to do before we put this game to rest. If we get to level star, this game's version of level 99, which is a pain in the ass, we can fight Specchio in his true ultimate final form. A pink gnu. Yeah, it's pretty funny. He even knows we're mocking him and gets mad at us for it. This fight is as easy as any other Specchio battle, especially because he has Zeal's move where everyone goes to 1 HP, allowing for some frog stomp cheesing. But it's a fun super boss and a worthy end to the Chrono Trigger journey. After everything we've been through, it ends with a new, just like it began. Well, it didn't, but wouldn't it be cool if it had? Chrono Trigger is a game that speaks for itself. I don't have to tell you how much of an impact it's had on the gaming landscape or how important it is to so many people. It's a game that's left its mark on history and is frequently lauded as one of the best games of all time. However, with that being said, it never really connected with me deeply on a personal level. I think Chrono Trigger is fantastic. I respect its design a lot. Its combat system is one of my favorites in any RPG. The balance between its characters, both narrative and gameplay-wise, is stellar, and the game doesn't ever really waste your time on meaningless stuff. I love it, but it's never really made me emotional. Chrono Trigger, to me, is like one of those sealed chests from the game itself. When I was a kid, I preferred Final Fantasy VI and kind of overlooked Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger doesn't really deal with as heavy of topics or as many characters as it, and it's way less relatable for me, so I assumed it was inherently worse. However, when I got older and looked at it again, I grew into appreciation for it and said, the gameplay, the music, the characters, it's all fantastic. It excels at being the peak of the 90s RPG. It is the quintessential experience for anyone looking to get into them. It's just plain fun through and through. This has been Arcade Everlasting, signing off, and Chrono Trigger proves that somehow, something all about time can be truly timeless.